Tonight we're exploring the hidden secrets of every Pokémon region. This is a fascinating topic, but I'll keep my narration calm to ensure you can still drift off to sleep. Thank you to those of you who've been joining us consistently. If you're falling asleep with us tonight, let me know in the comments how many nights in a row you've been here. And if this is your first night, just comment night 1. Now back to the video. When we pick up a console and begin a new journey, we often see these lands as mere playgrounds, a series of routes and cities designed for a 10-year-old to conquer. But beneath the tall grass and the paved paths of the Pokémon world lies a foundation built on thousands of years of blood, myth, and cosmic intervention. We think we know these places because we've walked them, but the maps we carry are only the surface layer of a much deeper, darker, and more complex reality. Every region, from the rural fields of Kanto to the sprawling craters of Paldea, is a graveyard of fallen civilizations and a monument to the gods that shaped them. Imagine for a moment that the world you know is actually a patchwork of ancient scars. We speak of the Pokémon world as a singular entity, but its history is a fractured timeline of near-extinction events and divine wars that would make human history look like a quiet afternoon. There was a time when the very ground beneath your feet didn't exist, when the oceans were being violently torn from the sky, and when the concept of time itself was a fragile, unformed thought. We are stepping into a world where the line between biology and divinity is non-existent. Why does it matter that a meteor struck Galar 3,000 years ago, or that a king in Kalos once turned a machine of life into a weapon of mass destruction? It matters because these events didn't just happen in the past. They are happening right now. The energy that allows your Pokémon to grow to the size of buildings or change their elemental type on a whim isn't just a game mechanic. It is the lingering radiation of ancient trauma. It is the heartbeat of a trapped god, or the residue of a war that nearly wiped life off the face of the earth. When we look at these regions, we aren't just looking at geography. We are looking at the evidence of a world that has died and been reborn a dozen times over. The mystery deepens when you realize how much the people living in these regions have forgotten. We find ruins in the desert, symbols etched into cave walls, and legends whispered by elders that the modern scientific community of the Pokémon world struggles to explain. Why did the ancient people of Sinnoh worship a creator they eventually forgot? How did the civilizations of the Hoenn region survive the literal reshaping of the continents? There are secrets buried in the lore that suggest our favorite regions are connected by more than just trade routes. They are bound by a shared, cyclical destiny that often involves the very Pokémon we keep in our pockets. We are about to embark on a journey through 10 distinct lands, stripping away the modern facade to reveal the ancient truths beneath. We will look at how the geography of Kanto reflects the dawn of modern research and how the traditional spires of Johto hide stories of resurrection and fire. We will descend into the primal chaos of Hoenn's creation and climb the peaks of Sinnoh to witness the birth of the universe itself. We'll traverse the industrial tensions of Unova, the war-torn elegance of Kalos, the interdimensional gateways of Alola, and the prehistoric mysteries of Galar and Paldea. Every step of the way, we will ask the questions that the Pokédex leaves unanswered. What happens to a civilization when its gods go to sleep? What is the true cost of the power we use in battle? And most importantly, what are the regions trying to tell us through the ruins they've left behind? The world of Pokémon is far older and far more dangerous than the bright colours of the tall grass would have you believe. It is a world of shadows, of ancient kings, of cosmic architects, and of secrets that have been waiting for 10 generations to be fully uncovered. As we move from the familiar shores of the East to the uncharted mysteries of the West, keep your mind open to the idea that the map is lying to you. The borders between these regions are thin, and the history that connects them is a single, winding thread of mystery. It is time to look past the tall grass. It is time to see the world not as a trainer, but as a witness to history. Before there was time, before there was space, before there was any dimension at all, there was only silence. Not the silence of a quiet room or the silence between stars, but an absolute infinite stillness. No light, no sound, no movement, no thought. And in that silence, something stirred. From the nothing, an egg emerged. Not a physical egg as we would recognize it, but a nucleus of pure potential floating in the void of non-existence. And from that egg came Arceus, the first being, the primordial creator, the one who would shape everything we now call the Pokémon world. This is the genesis of a world, a creation myth that does not merely explain the origin of one region, but sets the foundation for every region that would follow. The silence before the Big Bang held a single point of possibility, and Arceus cracked that possibility open. Think about the scale of that moment. Arceus did not simply craft a planet and populate it. It created the very fabric of reality. From its own being, it brought forth Dialga, the embodiment of time, and Palkia, the embodiment of space. It gave form to Giratina, the sovereign of antimatter, banishing it to a distorted dimension. These three alone govern the fundamental forces of existence, but Arceus did not stop there. Before the world could have life, it needed consciousness, and consciousness requires three pillars: the ability to feel, the ability to know, and the ability to choose. So Arceus created three beings, one for each pillar, and cast them into a great lake beneath the towering peak of Mount Coronet. These were Uxie, Mesprit, and Azelf, the Lake Trio. Emotion, knowledge, and willpower. They were not merely legendary Pokémon in the sense of being rare or powerful. They were the operating system of the mind. Every thought you have ever had, every feeling you have ever experienced, every decision you have ever made. It all traces back to the moment these three beings were set loose into the world. They are the reason Pokémon and humans can form bonds, can learn, can grow. Without them, the universe would be nothing more than a clockwork of raw elements, ticking without purpose. Now, here is where the story becomes something larger than a single myth. The tale of Arceus and the Lake Trio is not just Sinnoh's founding legend. It is the template upon which every other region's history is built. In Hoenn, you have Groudon and Kyogre, raw elemental forces of land and sea, but they are locked in a conflict that only makes sense because the world has consciousness to witness it. In Kalos, you have Xerneas and Yveltal, life and death, concepts that require the emotional understanding of loss and renewal that Mesprit embodies. In Galar, the darkest day was a catastrophe that could only be remembered and feared because Uxie granted the ability to record knowledge across generations. Sinnoh's creation myth is the operating system. Every other region is an application running on top of it. The legends of Hoenn or Unova or Alola are expansions of what Arceus set in motion. The Lake Trio's influence is the reason that humans in every region can look at a legendary Pokémon and feel awe, or fear, or reverence. Emotion, knowledge, and willpower are the lenses through which the entire Pokémon world perceives itself. So when you stand at the peak of Mount Coronet in the games, you are not just visiting a location, you are standing at the center of creation. The land beneath your feet was shaped by the same hands that forged time and space. The lakes of Sinnoh still hold the echoes of Mesprit and Azelf, their presence rippling outward into every corner of the world, even into regions that have never heard the name Arceus. And yet, for all its cosmic grandeur, this is only the beginning, because after creation came conflict. After the silence came the storm, and in another region, far to the south, the primal forces of land and sea began their endless war, a war that would reshape an entire continent and carve the scars of a battle so immense that it still echoes in the magma and the tides. That story, the primordial shaping of Hoenn, is one you will want to hear. After the universe was born, and consciousness first stirred in the lakes of emotion, knowledge, and willpower, the world began to cool. What had been a searing, formless expanse of primordial energy slowly coalesced into something solid. The great egg of creation had hatched, and from its shell emerged a realm of rock and sea, sky and fire. But for a long, long time, there was only chaos. The planet was a molten forge. Oceans of magma churned beneath a sky choked with ash and steam. There was no air to breathe, no land to stand on, only the ceaseless roiling of elements, each vying for dominance. And as the crust began to harden, as the first continents pressed upward from the cooling mantle, two forces took shape. They were not born in the way life would later be born. They emerged from the planet's own agony, from the friction of tectonic plates and the pressure of the deep earth. One was the embodiment of the land itself, Groudon, a being of volcanic fire and continental weight, whose every step raised mountain ranges, and whose every breath filled the air with the smell of basalt and iron. The other was the embodiment of the sea, Kyogre, a leviathan of endless deeps, whose coming summoned storms that could drown entire land masses, whose presence made the oceans rise and the shores retreat. They were not enemies at first. They were simply the planet's will made flesh, the expression of two opposing forces that could not coexist without conflict, and conflict came. As the planet cooled further, As the first stable landmasses began to drift and collide, Groudon sought to expand the continents. It would raise the seafloor, push mountains from the crust, and claim every inch of the globe for the Earth. By pulling the waters deeper, flooding the valleys, swallowing the coasts, and covering the world in an endless ocean. They fought for eons. Their battle was not a war of strategy or malice. It was a geological war, a literal reshaping of the world through sheer elemental fury. Every tremor felt across the planet was the clash of these two titans. Every tsunami, every volcanic eruption, every shift in the magnetic poles was a consequence of their struggle. This was the primordial shaping of Hoenn, the region that would one day be known for its tropical islands, its volcanic peak, its ancient forests and deep seas was at the very epicenter of this planetary conflict. The landmass that would become Hoenn was broken and remade countless times. Mountains were born and sank, seas expanded and evaporated. It was a landscape of constant, violent transformation. But the world could not remain in chaos. The planet needed balance. And so a third being stirred in the high atmosphere, where the gases were thinning and the first layers of the sky were taking shape. Rayquaza. It had always been there, riding the upper currents, watching the turmoil below from a place of serene distance. It was not born of land or sea, but of the sky itself, of the air that now wrapped the cooling planet like a blanket. And when the battle between Groudon and Kyogre threatened to tear the crust apart, Rayquaza descended. It came not in anger, but in authority. Its descent through the atmosphere created wind patterns that would define the global climate for millennia. It descended into the heart of the conflict, and with a single resonant cry, it commanded them to stop. Groudon retreated into the magma chambers beneath the earth, into a cavern called the Cave of Origin. Kyogre sank into the deepest oceanic trench, into a realm of darkness and pressure where no light reaches, and Rayquaza rose again, back into the upper atmosphere, where it would remain as a guardian of the boundary between Earth and the void of space. In that moment, the ozone layer was established, not as a deliberate creation, but as a consequence of Rayquaza's presence. The atmospheric particles it disturbed, the energies it channeled, the ozone it generated through its very being a shield that would protect the nascent life below from the sun's most harmful rays. The sky became a living membrane. The balance of the world was set, and so the planet settled. The continents continued to drift, but with Groudon and Kyogre dormant, the pace of change slowed from cataclysm to gradual shift. The seas still rose and fell, but no longer in a frenzy. The land still pushed upward, but no longer with volcanic abandon. The world was ready for the next chapter of its history, for the slow, patient emergence of life and the civilizations that would one day look up at the sky and wonder what had made it blue. But that story belongs to another region, another time. Before the factories of Kanto could hum with the light of industry, before its people could tame the wilderness and build their power plants and their gyms, the world had to cool. The land had to be stable. The sky had to be clear. The geological war of Hoenn had to end. And when it did, the planet was finally ready to receive its first true inhabitants. The dawn was coming, but it would not break over the volcanic peaks of Hoenn. It would break over a quiet peninsula, a place of simple grass and gentle rivers, a region that would one day become the foundation of everything we know as the Pokémon world. Kanto's industrial dawn was still countless years away, but the embers of that first fire were glowing deep beneath the earth, waiting to be kindled. The previous chapter carried us through the violence of creation, the raw elemental war between Groudon and Kyogre, where the crust of Hoenn was pulled apart and reformed by the clash of land and sea. That was a time when the planet itself was the stage for myth, but now we turn to a region that stands as the most stark example of a world that has forgotten its own gods, Kanto. If you look at a map of Kanto, you see a region of orderly grids, bustling cities and straight highways. It is a landscape carved not by legendary beasts, but by steel and concrete, and that is precisely why Kanto has no central creation deity. Unlike Sinnoh with its almighty Sinnoh, or Hoenn with its titans of the deep, Kanto's mythology is almost silent. The few legends that survive are fragmented, whispered about a trio of birds dwelling on islands, or a mysterious being sleeping beneath the seafloor. But there is no story of a creator shaping this land. Why? Because Kanto's history is one of rapid industrialization, a period where human hands, not divine ones, became the architects of the region. The ancient myths were not lost to time so much as they were paved over, forgotten in the race to build a modern society. The people of Kanto began to see their world not as a gift from the heavens, but as a resource to be harnessed. This shift from myth to modernity reached its defining moment in the aftermath of a great war, a war that left scars across the region, scars that are still visible in the geography today. The power plant at Rock Tunnel, the sprawling factory complexes of Saffron City, the mines littering the eastern coast. These are not just set pieces. They are the hidden scars of a society that had to rebuild itself from the ground up. And out of that chaos, the Indigo League was born. It was not founded as a celebration of battle, but as a method of stabilization. Think about it, a unified league system, with gym leaders stationed across the region, each one a pillar of authority and order. The League was a peace treaty written in gym badges. It turned the violence of war into a structured competition, giving the people a way to channel their strength without tearing each other apart. The very structure of Kanto, with its 8 gyms and the Elite Four, is a monument to that post-war compromise. But look closer at the landscape. The straight lines of the eastern coast, the artificial islands built for power plants and harbours, the way Cerulean City nestles next to a river that was rerouted for industry. The geography of Kanto does not tell a story of natural formation. It tells a story of engineering. The Saffron Sylph Co. building dominates the skyline, a corporate castle that represents a new kind of power. Even the famous cycling road, a bridge that cuts across the region, is a scar of progress. Kanto lacks a creation deity because its creation story is a human one, written in blueprints and steel beams. The myths that remain, like the legendary birds of the Sevi Islands, are pushed to the fringes, to the wild edges that industry has not yet touched. This is the dawn of an industrial age, and with it comes a new kind of shadow. A shadow that does not fall from the wings of a legendary, but from the ambitions of men and women who see power as a commodity to be bought and sold. The Indigo League brought stability, but it also created a system where the strongest could seize control. And in the gaps between order and ambition, something dark began to rise. That shadow, for those who listen closely, has a name. And in the next chapter, we will follow its trail into the very heart of the region, where the true cost of progress is revealed. Kanto emerged from its war-torn past into the industrial dawn of the Pokémon League, a stabilizing force built on order and structured competition. But beneath the gleaming new gyms and the cheerful bustle of Viridian City, something else was stirring. A shadow that did not come from the sky or the sea, but from the cold, deliberate mind of a man who understood that the truest power was not the politics of badges, but the very fabric of life itself. Giovanni, the Viridian gym leader, was never satisfied with mere territorial control. To him, the League was a useful stage, but the real script was written in the double helix of Pokémon DNA. He saw the regions not as maps of cities and routes, but as a biological tapestry, every species, every type, every legendary, a thread woven into a pattern he intended to unravel and respin. His true motive was not wealth or conquest, though those were pleasant side effects. He wanted to command the biological source code of the region, the primordial instructions that dictated what a Pokémon could be. If he could rewrite that code, he could dictate the future of all life. So Team Rocket turned its attention to the ultimate prize, the rarest and most elusive of all Pokémon, Mew. Said to contain the genetic blueprint of every single Pokémon that ever existed, Mew was more than a myth, it was a living key. And Giovanni wanted to replicate that key, to forge his own creation from its divine template. This was the Mewtwo project, a dark mirror to the sacred genesis Arceus had once performed in the void before time. Arceus shaped the universe from chaos with a thought and a pulse of light. Giovanni, in his arrogance, decided that science could perform the same miracle. Only this time the creator would be human, and the creation would serve a single master. Deep beneath Cinnabar Island, hidden from the sun and from the League's watchful eye, the secret labs hummed with machinery that should never have existed. White-coated scientists moved in a world of artificial light, surrounded by tanks of amber fluid and the faint, rhythmic pulsing of life support systems. They were not creating a Pokémon. They were attempting to conjure a god from a strand of stolen heritage. Cinnabar's underground became a cathedral of hubris, where science tried to play God and failed. Failure is not the word they would have used, of course. The creature that formed in that chamber was alive, conscious, and indescribably powerful. But it was also aware of what it was, a copy, an artifact, a being made and not born. It had no mother, no father, no wild place to call home. It had only its anger and its immense lonely strength. The Mewtwo project was a success in the narrowest sense. A Pokémon of unparalleled psychic force was born, capable of tearing through walls with its mind and reshaping the very air around it. But Giovanni had not accounted for the will of a creation that could think for itself. Mewtwo saw the chains it was meant to wear, saw the cold eyes of its creators, and it made a choice. The labs on Cinnabar Island erupted in a storm of broken glass and shattered steel. The island itself trembled as the creature that should have been a weapon became a fugitive, carrying the weight of its own unnatural origin. Giovanni's dream of controlling the biological source code collapsed into ash and fleeing scientists. The man who had tried to rival the creation myth of Arceus was left with nothing but a silent gym badge and a fading reputation. But the shadow did not vanish. It only retreated, waiting for a new form, a new region, a new chance to twist the world's natural order. And as that shadow receded from Kanto's skies, another light began to glow, older and deeper, in the mountains and forests to the west. A region where tradition had never been forgotten, where towers still held the ashes of ancient fires, and where the sacred and the everyday walked side by side. Those traditions and the secrets they guard are waiting for us in Johto. From the cold, sterile labs of Cinnabar Island, from the ambition of a man who sought to rewrite the very code of life, we must now travel somewhere older, somewhere the world has not yet learned to forget. Leave behind the hum of machinery, the flicker of fluorescent lights, and the scent of ozone. Step out of Kanto's industrial shadow and cross the border into a region that does not look toward the future, but has spent millennia guarding the past. Johto is not simply the next region on a game cartridge. It is the spiritual heart of the Pokémon world, and its roots are buried deep in the soil of a real place, the Kansai region of Japan. If Kanto is the brash, modernizing capital, think Tokyo, steel and glass, then Johto is Kyoto, Nara, the ancient capital where emperors once walked, where temples outnumber train stations, and where time moves at a slower, more deliberate pace. This is not an accident. The designers of the Pokémon world built Johto to feel sacred. Its geography is a map of shrines, hidden groves, and towers that point toward the heavens. Even the cities are named after natural features and seasons: violet, azalea, goldenrod, as if the land itself still holds a memory of the divine. And what a memory it is. Because before there were people, before there were Pokémon as we know them, there was a voice, a language so old that it is not spoken, but written in shapes that cannot be understood by the human mind. I am speaking, of course, of the unknown. The ruins of Alph stand in the southwestern corner of Johto, a labyrinth of stone and dust that predates any known civilization. Archaeologists who have studied the site, and they are few, because the Pokémon world does not seem to prioritize academic curiosity, have found walls, covered in symbols that appear to be letters. But these are not letters from any human alphabet. They are the unknown. Each one is a single, floating glyph that also happens to be a Pokémon. There are 28 known forms, each corresponding to a letter of the Latin alphabet, plus a question mark and an exclamation point. But that is only what on the surface. The deeper truth is far more unsettling. The unknown seem to exist in a state between language and matter. They are not merely symbols that represent concepts. They are concepts made manifest. When they gather in large numbers, they can warp reality. They can materialize thoughts, create dimensional rifts, and even respond to the will of a human mind. There is evidence, fragmentary, hidden, but persistent, that the unknown were here before humans, before Pokémon. Before Arceus shaped the universe from a single egg, perhaps the unknown were the first whisper of order in the chaos, a primordial alphabet that wrote the very laws of physics into existence. If that is true, then the ruins of Alph are not a monument to a lost civilization. They are a fragment of the world's original instruction manual, a codex from before time began, and Johto in its quiet, unassuming way has held this secret for eons. The architecture of Johto reflects this reverence for the ancient. The towers of Ecruteak City rise not as modern skyscrapers, but as wooden pagodas, their curved eaves designed to withstand both wind and the weight of centuries. The brass tower, the tin tower, they were built not for utility, but for communion. They are places where the boundary between the mortal and the mythic grows thin, and that is the key to understanding why Johto has remained the spiritual heart of the Pokémon world, because peace in Johto is not something that is enforced by a league or a police force. Peace is preserved through architecture, through ritual, through the simple act of remembering. In Kanto, you fight for badges and climb a ladder of power. In Johto, you walk a pilgrimage. Every gym, every route, every hidden spring is a reminder that this land was sacred, long before the first trainer ever threw a Pokeball. But even sacred places can be broken, and Johto's heart, for all its serenity, carries a wound that has never fully healed. Not far from the ruins of Alph, in the shadow of the Tin Tower, there is a structure that was once called the Brass Tower. It burned to the ground 2 centuries ago in a lightning strike that seemed almost deliberate. The fire raged for 3 days, and in its aftermath, 3 Pokemon were said to have perished. But the story does not end there, because from the ashes of that tower, something else began to stir. A legend, a tragedy, and a question that still has no answer. This is the story we will tell next. The story of the burned tower, the 3 Pokemon who fell, and the darkness that has been waiting in the shadows of Johto ever since. Close your eyes if you wish, but know this: the flames of that fire have never truly gone out. In the shadow of the Ecruteak city skyline, 2 towers once stood as monuments to the bond between humanity and Pokemon. The Brass Tower, gleaming in the sunlight, and the Bell Tower, its counterpart, where a rainbow-winged Pokemon was said to descend. But there is a reason only one of those towers remains standing today, and that reason is a tragedy so profound it reshaped the spiritual landscape of Johto forever. The ancient records speak of a storm unlike any other. It was not merely a tempest of wind and rain, but a convergence of elemental fury, lightning, fire and water, all focused on a single point. The Brass Tower, that symbol of harmony, became the epicenter of a catastrophe. Legend tells of 3 nameless Pokemon that sought refuge inside the tower as the storm raged. They were ordinary, unknown creatures, without legend or title, simply seeking shelter from the chaos outside. But the tower itself would not protect them. The lightning struck first. A blinding bolt, seemingly guided by an unseen hand, shattered the upper floors and ignited the ancient wooden beams. Then came the fire, spreading like a living thing, consuming everything in its path. The 3 Pokemon, trapped within the inferno, perished in the flames. And just as the fire began to die, the rain came, a deluge so heavy it doused the embers, but could not undo what had been done. The lightning, the fire, and the rain. The death of 3 nameless Pokemon, reduced to ash and memory within the burned-out shell of the Brass Tower. But that is not where the story ends. From the ashes of that tragedy, a new legend was born. As the smoke cleared, and the survivors of Ecruteak gathered to mourn, a figure emerged from the Bell Tower. Ho-Oh, the rainbow Pokemon, descended upon the ruins. It had witnessed the sacrifice of those 3 innocent souls. And in that moment it made a choice. Ho-Oh's resurrection power, a force as old as the cycle of life itself, reached down into the ashes. It did not merely bring the 3 Pokemon back to life. It transformed them. They rose as something new, something eternal. Their bodies remade to embody the very elements that had taken them. The lightning, the fire, and the rain. Raikou, the thunder beast. Entei, the volcano lion. Suicune, the aurora of the north wind. The birth of the legendary beasts as symbols of nature's cycle. Destruction, rebirth, and renewal. Forever tied to the tragedy of the burned tower. But there is another figure in this story, one often overlooked. Lugia, the guardian of the seas, had once made its home in the towers of Ecruteak alongside Ho-Oh. Some say Lugia was present during the storm, perhaps even trying to quell the violence of the sky. But after the fire, something changed. Lugia looked upon the devastation, upon the burned tower and the new beasts that now roamed the land, and it chose to leave. The Lugia Exodus. Why the guardian of the seas fled to the Whirl Islands, far from the memory of that night. Some whisper that Lugia could not bear the sorrow of what had happened, or that it sensed a shift in the balance of the world. Others believe that Lugia's departure was a deliberate act, a separation of domains, leaving the land to Ho-Oh and the beasts, while it took the seas as its own. The Whirl Islands, a maze of raging currents and hidden caverns, became its sanctuary, a place where Lugia could watch over the oceans in solitude, forever tied to that one catastrophic evening in Johto's past. The burned tower remains a ruin to this day, a silent monument to loss and the power that rose from it. It is a place where trainers come to feel the weight of history, where the stones themselves seem to hum with the energy of transformation, and yet the full depth of the tragedy, the nameless Pokémon, the lightning, the fire, the rain, is often reduced to a simple legend. But legends, as we have seen, are the shadows of real events, distorted by time but never fully erased. The cycle continues, just as Ho-Oh intended, and the beasts still roam, forever chasing the storm that created them. As we leave the burned ruins of Johto behind, we turn to a colder, older mystery. Far to the north, buried beneath the ice of a forgotten age, something stirs. There are Titans, ancient, mechanical, bound to the elements of rock, ice and steel, who have slept for millennia. Their awakening could reshape the very geography of the world, and their purpose is tied to the distant past of the Hoenn region. But that story is sealed within a frozen tomb, waiting for the heat of curiosity to thaw its secrets. And when it does, we will learn that some legends are not born from fire and lightning, but from the slow, grinding silence of a world locked in ice. The previous chapter closed with the smoking embers of the burned tower and the thunderous flight of Ho-Oh into the dawn, resurrecting 3 fallen souls into the eternal guardians of nature's cycle. That was a story of fire and rebirth, of divine mercy tempering tragedy. But if you think that was the most cataclysmic event in the ancient world, you haven't yet felt the ground shift beneath your feet, because while Johto wept for its lost tower in a far older age, something colossal was dragging entire continents across the face of the planet, something that left behind not legends of resurrection, but of imprisonment. Hoenn, long before the superheating conflict of Groudon and Kyogre boiled the seas and raised the mountains, was a world still finding its shape. The crust was young, the oceans restless, and in that era of raw, untamed geography, there walked a Titan. Its name is Regi-Titans, the Colossus that pulled the continents into their current positions. Not a creator in the sense of Arceus or the Weather Triad, but a mover, a drafter of landscapes. Imagine a being so immense that ropes were wrapped around land masses, and with a single patient pull, entire regions slid across the mantle. It did not command the earth to rise. It simply rearranged what was already there. But why would such a being need to reshape the world? The answer lies in the Ice Age that followed the planet's early cooling. As the world settled, the primal energies that had once churned freely began to stabilize. The continents, however, were still drifting too rapidly, causing climatic chaos. Regi-Titans, perhaps guided by a deeper planetary instinct, began its great work. It towed the landmasses into positions that would eventually calm the climate, create stable ecosystems, and allow life to flourish without constant geological upheaval. You can still see the scars of this labor in the shape of Hoenn itself, the jagged coastline of Route 130, the deep trench off the coast of Dewford Town, places where the crust remembers being strained. Yet the Titan did not work alone. Regi-Titans crafted servants, 3 golems, each forged from the elemental essence of the world. Regirock from continental stone, Regis from the primordial ice of the great glaciers, and Registeel from the molten metals deep within the planet. These were not merely tools, they were guardians, extensions of Regi-Titans' will. For a time they worked in concert, a silent assembly of titans tending the planet's form. But then something changed. Ancient civilizations arose, and they discovered these golems. At first they saw them as protectors, perhaps even deities. They built temples around them, offered tributes, and recorded their presence in the earliest forms of writing. Yet the more they studied the Regis, the more fear set in. Why? Because the Regis were not built to serve humanity. They were built to serve a planetary process. When the land needed to shift, they would shift, regardless of what cities or kingdoms stood in the way. The ancient Hoennese realized that their protectors were, in reality, uncontrollable forces of nature with the power to reshape the world at any moment. and the only being that could command them was Regi-Titans itself, a sleeping giant that might one day wake and decide the current arrangement of the continents no longer suited its purpose. The sealing of the Regis became an act of survival, a desperate, coordinated effort by the earliest Hoenn civilizations to imprison these golems before they could be reactivated. Into hidden caves beneath the sea, and behind rock walls they placed them, each sealed behind a door that required a code written in a language that was already ancient when these people first spoke it. That language was Braille, not the raised dots we know today, but an earlier, tactile script used by a culture that may have been blind to the visible world, but saw clearly the dangers of their own creations. And that brings us to one of the most haunting pieces of lore in the Pokémon world, the Braille messages in the Hoenn caves, a desperate plea from a forgotten era. When you explore these chambers in the games, you find patterns of raised bumps on stone tablets. They instruct you how to open the sealed chambers, which moves to use, which order to approach. But if you read the full message, it says something far more chilling. It says, "We who have awakened the Regi, we have created a seal that will not be broken. Do not move the pillars. Do not use strength. Do not use rock smash. The Regi will not rest until the world is moved." It is a warning from ancestors who in their time had already made the mistake of waking the Titans. They had seen the glaciers crawl and the mountains march. They had fled their own cities as Regi-Titans stirred, and they used the only tool they had left, a written testament in a language they hoped would survive the ages, begging future generations never to repeat their error. Yet here we are, generations later, in a world where trainers casually awaken these golems, catch them in Pokeballs, and use them in battle. We have forgotten the weight of those Braille messages. We interpret them as puzzles rather than prayers. But the truth remains. The Regis were not meant to be captured. They were meant to sleep. And Regi-Titans, the colossus that pulled the continents, is still out there. Its slumber deeper than the ocean floor, but not eternal. Some legends say it slumbers in a temple far to the north, in the ancient region that would one day be called Hisui, a land of snow and ice, where the very air remembers the cold of the last great glacial advance. A land where, long before the first settlers built villages, Regi-Titans may have rested its weary bones after its final act of continental rearrangement. And in that frozen temple, something stirs. Not the giant itself, not yet, but the echoes of its power, waiting for a moment when the world once again needs to be moved. That moment may be closer than we think, for in the history of Hisui, there is a transformation waiting to be uncovered, a shift not of continents but of time itself, and the key to understanding it lies with that sleeping titan and the ancient language that still whispers from the walls of forgotten caves. The colossus named Regi-Titans had pulled the continents into place, and the ancient civilizations, fearing their own protectors, had sealed the Regi-Titans away in silent chambers of stone. But if Regi-Titans had shaped the land, then there was one region where the very fabric of reality was shaped by something far greater. A place where the ground itself was a scar left by the birth of time, and where the sky would one day tear open like a wound that nearly bled the timeline into nothingness. That place was not always called Sinnoh. Before it was Sinnoh, it was Hisui. Hisui was a land of extremes. Jagged mountain ranges broke through mist-choked valleys, and the sea clawed at shores littered with driftwood and ice. The air held a sharp, cold bite that cut through even the thickest firs, and the forests, when they appeared, were dense with ancient trees that had never known an axe. This was not a region that welcomed civilization. It was a frontier, untamed and raw, where the people who arrived had to fight for every scrap of warmth and every mouthful of food. And yet they came. Two clans, the Diamond Clan and the Pearl Clan, settled here, drawn by a shared reverence for something they called Almighty Sinnoh, but they did not agree on what that name meant. For the Diamond Clan, Almighty Sinnoh was the being that ruled over time, the force that kept the world moving forward, second by second. For the Pearl Clan, It was the master of space, the entity that gave the world its shape and form. This disagreement was not a minor philosophical difference. It shaped every aspect of their lives. How they hunted, how they built their settlements, how they prayed, and it was this schism that would make them blind to the true nature of the sky that loomed above them. One day the sky split open. It was not a storm, not a trick of the light. A rift tore through the heavens, a jagged, pulsing wound of brilliant violet and silver light. From that rift, energy poured down like a waterfall of molten glass, warping the land and the creatures that lived upon it. Pokémon that were once docile became frenzied, their eyes glowing with an unnatural rage. The weather itself turned violent, with lightning striking from clear skies and hailstones, the size of fists falling in the middle of summer. The clans were terrified. They called it the Sky Rift, the great calamity, the tear in the world. But what caused it? The answer lies in the nature of this region's deepest secret. Hisui is the place where the three pillars of existence, time, space, and antimatter, were first anchored to the physical world. Arceus, the original being, had created Dialga to control the flow of time, Palkia to shape the fabric of space, and Giratina to govern the dimension of antimatter. But creation is never a clean process. When these forces were first bound to the material plane, they did not settle easily. They struggled, they clashed, and their conflict rippled outward through the very dimensions they were meant to govern. That ripple, that instability became the rift. It was a crack in the boundary between realities, a place where time and space became fluid and malleable, and it was spreading. If left unchecked, it would not just destroy Hisui, it would erase the timeline itself, unmaking everything that had ever happened and everything that ever would. The clans had no way of knowing this. They only knew that their world was breaking apart. And then a stranger appeared. A figure fell from the rift, landing in the snow of an obsidian field. This stranger carried no memory of their own past, but they carried a device, a strange glowing tablet that responded to their touch. The clans, desperate for answers, took this stranger in. Some saw them as a messenger from Almighty Sinnoh. Others saw them as a curse. But as the rift grew larger, and as the frenzied Pokémon threatened to overrun the settlements, the stranger became the only one who could walk between the clans and the chaos. This is where the forgotten heroes enter the story. Not the legendary Pokémon, not the clan leaders, but the people who acted as bridges. The stranger who fell from the rift, the one who would later be called the hero of Hisui, was not alone. There were others, scholars who risked their lives to study the rift, wardens who guarded the ancient lords of the land, trying to calm them before their frenzy destroyed entire villages, and the clan leaders themselves, Kamado and Adaman and Irida, who set aside their centuries-old rivalry long enough to realize that survival mattered more than doctrine. But history has a way of swallowing the details. When the rift was finally sealed, when Dialga and Palkia were subdued, when Giratina was banished back to its own dimension, the clans returned to their old arguments. They rewrote the story of the crisis, shaping it to fit their own beliefs. The Diamond Clan claimed that the rift was a punishment for disrespecting time. The Pearl Clan insisted it was a warning about the dangers of misusing space. The stranger, the one who had carried the burden of saving them all, faded from their chronicles. Their name was erased, their deeds reduced to a vague legend of a wanderer who came and went like the wind. Why? Because admitting that a single outsider had done, and what neither clan could do, would have undermined their entire worldview. It would have meant that their sacred conflict over Almighty Sinnoh was irrelevant, that the true power lay not in their traditions, but in the raw, unpredictable connection between humanity and Pokémon. And so they rewrote the history. The rift became a test of faith, the hero became a myth, and the region itself was renamed. Hisui became Sinnoh, a name that honoured the deity they had argued about for so long. But the truth of what happened, the interdimensional instability, the nearly erased timeline, the forgotten heroes, remained buried beneath layers of snow and silence. Even today, in the modern Sinnoh region, the story is told differently. The lake guardians Uxie, Mesprit, and Azelf are remembered as the beings of knowledge, emotion, and willpower, but few know that they were the ones who first sensed the rift and called for help. Mount Coronet is still worshipped as the pillar of the world, but the magnetic pull that draws trainers and researchers alike is not just a geological quirk, it is the lingering echo of that dimensional tear, a subtle tug on the borders of reality that still hums beneath the mountain's stone. And it is that pull, that silent, irresistible force, that will lead us deeper into the mountain's heart, into the chambers where time and space were once stitched back together, and where the next secret of the Pokémon world waits to be uncovered. You stepped out of the Hisui rift, and the sky sealed itself shut. The instability that nearly erased the timeline settled into something vast and unmoving, a mountain that had always been waiting, Mount Coronet. It is not just the highest peak in Sinnoh, not just a landmark you climb to reach the Pokémon League. It is the geological center of the world, the axis around which the continent was forged. And if you follow the currents of energy that ripple beneath the earth, you will find that every ley line, every tectonic whisper, every pulse of primal force converges here, at the spine of the region. Why does all energy flow toward the peak? The answer lies in the moment of creation. When Arceus emerged from the void, it did not simply will the world into existence from a distance. It descended. The first point of contact between the divine and the material was Mount Coronet. Imagine a needle driven into the fabric of reality, anchoring the cosmos to a single location. From that anchoring, the land was pulled upward, folded, compressed into a massive ridge that now runs almost the entire length of Sinnoh. The mountain is not a volcano, not in the ordinary sense. It is a conduit. Deep within its core, the temperature and pressure are so extreme that the rock itself becomes fluid, but not molten, something closer to solidified time. And because the mountain was born from the touch of the original one, it retains a magnetic pull that draws not only iron in the soil, but the very essence of the world. This pull shapes everything. It dictates the migration patterns of wild Pokémon over thousands of years. It influences the weather, pulling storms upward and releasing them as snow or rain across the central highlands. Ancient Sinnoh people built their settlements in its shadow, not out of fear, but out of reverence. They called the mountain the pillar of the world. They were not wrong. Below the surface, the crust is thin, almost transparent in certain caverns. And if you descend far enough, you can hear a low hum, the sound of the Earth's core spinning in rhythm with something beyond the physical. It is not a sound that can be recorded by any device. It is felt, and it is that same energy that during the violent formation of the region forced a colossal rupture in the crust far to the north. That rupture became Stark Mountain. Stark Mountain is not a separate geological event. It is the volcanic byproduct of creation itself, a pressure release valve of the force that built Mount Coronet. When the continent was still young, the same tectonic forces that folded the land upward also cracked it open in other places. Magma from deep within the planet surged toward the surface, but it was not ordinary magma. It was charged with the residual energy of the first act of creation. As it cooled, it did not simply harden into basalt and obsidian. It crystallized into a unique mineral formation that trapped heat and held it. And in the heart of that cooling lava pool, something stirred, a creature born from the fire, the pressure, and the lingering will of creation. Heatran. Heatran is often described as a legendary Pokémon of volcanic power, but that description undersells its origin. It was not placed there by Arceus. It was not shaped by any conscious design. It emerged spontaneously from the interaction between raw creation energy and the elemental fury of the world. In a way, Heatran is the world's immune response to the presence of such concentrated divine power. It is a living manifestation of the planet's ability to absorb, reshape, and contain forces beyond its natural order. Its body is made of steel and magma, It can walk through walls of solid rock by melting them, and it feeds on the heat that still radiates from the planet's cooling core. But Heatran is not a threat, not by nature. It is a guardian of the deepest places, a sentinel that ensures the volcanic energy beneath Sinnoh remains balanced. If Mount Coronet is the heart, Stark Mountain is the lungs, and Heatran is the breath that keeps them from exploding. To stand at the base of Mount Coronet is to feel the weight of geology and mythology pressing against you from all sides. The path upward is steep and cold, windswept, covered in moss and lichen that only grow in the thin air of high altitudes. But when you finally reach the summit, you do not find a crater or a peak. You find a plateau, and on that plateau, carved by forces that predate human hands, lies the Spear Pillar. It is a structure of immense stone columns arranged in a circle, open to the sky, with a central platform shaped like a spearhead pointing toward heaven. The Spear Pillar is not a temple in the human sense. It was never built. It was formed. The same magnetic pull that draws energy to Mount Coronet also arranges the stone into patterns that resonate with the dimensions beyond. This is the bridge. The Spear Pillar is a place where the physical world and the distortion world touch. The distortion world is not a parallel dimension in the sci-fi sense. It is a reflection, a shadow cast by reality itself, where time moves in fractured loops and gravity obeys no law. You can see it if you stare into the sky at the Spear Pillar during a certain alignment of stars. The air seems to shimmer, and for a moment you glimpse a landscape turned upside down, with rivers flowing upward and islands floating in a space that has no horizon. Giratina, the Pokémon banished to that place for its violence during creation, lives there, but it is not a prison. It is a necessary counterpart. The distortion world exists because the universe requires an opposite, a place where the rules are not broken, but simply different. And the Spear Pillar is the only stable gateway, the only point where a traveller can step from one side to the other and return. You do not need a key or a ritual to cross. The mountain itself grants passage to those who are ready, to those who can withstand the magnetic pull without losing their sense of self. The ancient people of Sinnoh knew this. They left no written records, but they carved symbols into the stone around the Spear Pillar. Symbols that match the ones found at the Sinjo ruins and the ruins of Alph. A language that is older than humanity, older than memory. A language that describes the geometry of the boundary between worlds. And that boundary, that thin membrane where Mount Coronet's energy meets the void of the distortion world, is the subject of our next exploration. The paradox of a place that exists outside of time, yet touches every moment. The paradox of Giratina, who is neither good nor evil, but simply the necessary balance to creation itself. That is the distortion world paradox. And when we step through the Spear Pillar, we will see what lies on the other side. From the peak of Mount Coronet, we've traced the flow of energy that shapes the entire world of Pokémon. That mountain is not merely a geological structure. It is the axis around which reality itself was wound. Every force that governs time, space, and even the raw stuff of matter converges there. But if the mountain is the center, then what lies at the edge? What happens when creation, in its infinite complexity, produces something that does not fit within the fabric of space and time, something that must be cast out? Giratina was not born from chaos. It was not an accident. In the ancient moment when Arceus shaped the universe, three beings emerged to govern the fundamental pillars of existence. Dialga took the reins of time, Palkia assumed dominion over space, and Giratina was given authority over antimatter. But antimatter is not merely a destructive opposite. It is the necessary counterbalance to everything that exists. However, its nature is fundamentally incompatible with the ordered flow of time and space. Giratina could not dwell beside its siblings without distorting the very reality they were meant to protect, and so it was banished. But banishment does not mean deletion. Arceus did not destroy Giratina, nor could it. To destroy antimatter would be to unmake the universe itself. For every particle of matter requires an equal and opposite partner to maintain balance. Instead, a separate dimension was created, a realm where time does not flow, where space has no fixed geometry, a pocket of existence that is neither here nor there, neither past nor future. This is the Distortion world, a prison built not of walls but of perpetual paradox. In this place, gravity is a suggestion. Up can become down without warning. Always loop back on themselves, and the horizon twists into impossible angles. Giratina was condemned to an eternal exile within this liminal space, forever separated from the world it was born to counterbalance. Yet that balance is precisely why the Pokémon world still exists. Consider what would happen if Giratina were truly gone. Antimatter would be unanchored, free to react with ordinary matter in a chain reaction of annihilation. The universe would collapse into a sea of energy, without form, without permanence. Giratina's very presence, even in exile, acts as a gravitational anchor for the duality that holds creation together. It is the reason that light can exist without being swallowed by darkness, that order can persist without being consumed by entropy. The Distortion world is not just a prison. It is a necessary pressure valve, a containment chamber for the one force that cannot be allowed to touch the rest of reality. And that brings us to Cyrus. The leader of Team Galactic was a man who saw the world as flawed because he could not perceive its necessary contradictions. He looked at the struggle between time and space, between matter and antimatter, and he saw only imperfection. He believed that by capturing Dialga and Palkia, he could reset the universe into a new dimension of pure, orderly stillness. He thought he could erase the very need for antimatter, for entropy, for the chaos of existence. But in his arrogance, he ignored the fundamental truth that the universe is built on opposites. To remove Giratina from the equation, to attempt to create a reality without its dark twin, would not produce a perfect world. It would produce a void. A universe that has no substance, no change, no life. Cyrus's folly was not merely ambition. It was a failure to understand that every force, from the gentlest breeze to the most violent eruption, exists only because somewhere, in a realm of folded space and endless twilight, Giratina keeps the balance. When Cyrus's plan failed, it was not because of a lucky hero or a sudden change of heart. It was because reality itself resisted his attempt to break the fundamental law of duality. The Distortion world opened, and Giratina emerged, not as a monster to be defeated, but as a guardian of the equilibrium that Cyrus sought to destroy. And in that moment, that the so-called Dark Twin was never truly an enemy. It was the necessary shadow that gives depth to light. From Sinnoh's cosmic prison, we must now turn our gaze to a different kind of conflict. One that does not involve dimensions or antimatter, but the very nature of belief itself. In a distant land, two dragons once battled not over creation, but over a question that has haunted humanity since the first stories were told. Which is more powerful, truth or ideals? That war would reshape an entire region and leave behind a legacy that still divides people to this day. And the answer, if it exists at all, lies buried in the ashes of a conflict that may never truly end. Before we dive deeper into this incredible journey, I'm curious. Where in the world are you watching this from? Drop a comment below and let our global community know. And if you're finding this as mind-blowing as I am, hit that like button to help more people discover this story. We left the Distortion world as a necessary void, a realm where time and space do not flow, a place where Giratina was banished to maintain the balance of reality. But that balance is fragile, and it depends on more than just the antimatter counterpart. It depends on the very beliefs of those who inhabit the world. And nowhere is that idea more literally true than in the region of Unova. Unova is a land of stark contrast. It is a region built on the tension between truth and ideals, between the past and the future, between what is and what could be. And at the heart of that tension lies a legend so old, so foundational, that it shaped not just the geography of the region, but the very fabric of its history. A legend about a single dragon, a creature of immense power that was torn apart by the arguments of two brothers. The story begins long before any human settlement, when the land we now call Unova was a wild and untamed place. According to the oldest records, there existed a being of pure dragon energy, a colossal entity with no name, no allegiance, and no philosophy. It simply was. This dragon was a singularity, a living force of nature that could reshape the world with a thought. But then two brothers arrived. They were not kings, not gods, but they were the first to truly understand the dragon's power. They saw in it a reflection of their own souls. One brother believed in truth, the unyielding, objective reality of the world. The other believed in ideals, the perfect vision of what the world could become. They argued endlessly, each convinced that their path was the only way to guide the people of Unova. The dragon, bound to their will, could not choose. So it did the only thing it could. It split. The original dragon, one entity, was divided by the conflicting philosophies of two brothers. From that single body, two dragons emerged. One Reshiram, whose flame burned with the light of truth. The other, Zekrom, whose lightning crackled with the thunder of ideals. This is the central truth of Unova's myth. It is not a story of good versus evil. It is a story of belief made manifest. Reshiram and Zekrom are not just legendary Pokémon. They are the physical embodiment of the human capacity to hold a worldview. Reshiram represents the pursuit of truth, the belief that reality can be understood, and that knowledge must be pursued without compromise. Its tail flame glows with a pure white fire that never goes out, a fire that can burn away lies. Zekrom, on the other hand, represents the pursuit of ideals, the belief that the world can be improved, and that hope must be followed even against impossible odds. Its tail generates a constant storm of lightning, a force that can shatter stagnation. These are not arbitrary elements. Fire and thunder are the tools of change, the destroyers of the old and the creators of the new, and they are tied directly to the souls of the two brothers. But there was a third piece. When the original dragon split, something was left behind, a shell, an empty husk. That shell became Kyurem. And if Reshiram and Zekrom are the embodiment of belief, then Kyurem is the embodiment of absence. It is the hollow space where conviction once lived. It is the emptiness that remains when truth and ideals are both lost. And that emptiness is terrifying. The devastation of Kyurem's power is not subtle. It is the cold of absolute zero, the freeze that stops all movement, all thought, all life. And history records a moment when that cold was unleashed upon Unova. In the ancient past, a conflict between the followers of truth and the followers of ideals escalated into a full war. Armies clashed across the region, and the fires of Reshiram and the lightning of Zekrom guard the land. But it was not those two dragons that ended the war. It was the third. In the chaos, some desperate party sought to control the empty shell, to use Kyurem as a weapon. They failed. Kyurem, with no allegiance and no desire, simply reacted. It unleashed a wave of absolute cold that swept across the northern reaches of the region. The city of Opelucid, once a thriving center of trade and culture, was frozen solid in a single night. Trees turned to crystal. Rivers stopped mid-flow. The people, caught in their homes and streets, became statues of ice. The freezing of Opelucid City stands as the devastating testament to Kyurem's emptiness. It is a reminder that what is missing can be more dangerous than what is present. That frozen landscape remains to this day. In the games, you can visit Opelucid City and see the icy scars on the architecture, the frost that never melts, the silent monuments to a war that should never have happened. It is a graveyard of belief, a physical scar on the map of Unova, and it is the price paid for the conflict between truth and ideals. The brothers themselves, they did not survive the war. Their bodies were lost, but their philosophies lived on in the two dragons, and so the cycle continued. Every generation, new heroes would arise, siding with Reshiram or Zekrom, believing that their cause was the only just one. The region became a mirror for the internal struggle of every human being. Do you chase the truth, no matter how painful, or do you chase your ideals, no matter how impossible? And deep beneath the sands of Unova, buried by time and forgotten by most, lies another mystery, a structure so vast and so old that even the dragon legends cannot explain its origin. It is not a city, it is not a tomb, it is a castle, but not one built for kings. It was built for something far older, far stranger, and its secrets are buried so deep that even the light of truth and the thunder of ideals cannot reach them. That is where we will go next. The war between truth and ideals ended with the original dragon torn in two. But that was not the only cost of those ancient arguments. While Reshiram and Zekrom slumbered in their respective stones, the civilization that once worshipped both dragons began to crumble in a slower, quieter way, deep beneath the sands of what is now the desert resort. The relics of that fall still wait to be uncovered, and they tell a story far older than the brothers themselves. Long before the two princes clashed, the Unovan monarchy had built its seat of power not in a city of glass and steel, but in a palace carved into the living rock of a vast desert. This was no mere castle. It was a subterranean kingdom, a network of chambers and corridors that extended for miles beneath the dunes. The ancient Unovans called it the Relic Castle, and it was the heart of a civilization that mastered the art of harnessing geothermal energy and the warmth of fire-type Pokémon. The sands above were harsh and lifeless, but below, the halls were lit by braziers that never died, and the air was thick with the heat of hundreds of Volcarona. Yes, Volcarona, that majestic moth-like Pokémon, now legendary in its own right, was once the cornerstone of Unovan survival. In those days, the region was locked in a deep freeze. A volcanic winter, or perhaps the lingering aftermath of some earlier catastrophe, and the surface was uninhabitable. The people retreated underground, and it was Volcarona that became their sun. The ancient texts call it the sun of the underground, and it was no metaphor. Volcarona's fiery scales and blazing wings generated enough heat to warm entire chambers, to grow crops in subterranean farms, and to keep the chill of extinction at bay. Each Volcarona was a living furnace, tended by a priestly caste that understood the delicate balance between flame and life. But even the brightest sun can set. As the ice receded and the surface became livable again, the civilization of the Relic Castle began to hollow out. People ventured back into the open air, building new settlements, founding what would become modern Unova. The monarchy, however, did not follow them. The last king of that ancient line made a strange choice. Instead of moving his court to the sunlight, he ordered the castle's entrances sealed from the inside. He and his courtiers vanished into the deepest chambers, taking the Volcarona with them. Why? The common story is that he feared the surface world would corrupt the purity of his underground society. But the truth carved into the walls tells a different tale. In the lowest and most hidden room of Relic Castle, a chamber accessible only after solving a series of puzzles involving sand currents and hidden passages, the king left his final message. It is a message of warning, not of pride. He wrote that the monarchy chose to disappear because they had seen what was coming. The war between truth and ideals had not ended, it had only paused. The brothers might have separated the dragon, but their philosophies would continue to divide Unova for generations. The king foresaw endless conflict, a cycle of destruction that no crown could survive. So he buried himself and his court, hoping to preserve the old knowledge, until a time when the region was ready to hear it. That time has not yet come, and the Relic Castle remains a tomb of secrets. Those secrets include the fate of the original Volcarona. Most of them perished when the castle was sealed, their flames extinguished for lack of air and sustenance, but a few escaped, finding their way to the surface through forgotten tunnels. One such Volcarona was discovered centuries later by a researcher who named it the Guardian of the Desert, an ancient survivor that still remembers the warmth of the old world. Today, that Volcarona can be encountered in the deepest sands of the Relic Castle, its body still radiating the heat that once sustained a civilization. It stands as a living fossil, a bridge between the frozen past and the uncertain present, and so the desert swallows the castle, and the castle holds its king's silence. But silence is not the same as peace. There are whispers that the Volcarona's flame is not simply a memory, that it flickers with a purpose, waiting for a descendant of the old line to return and unlock the king's final command. What that command might be, no living soul knows. Perhaps it is a key to understanding why the monarchy truly vanished. Perhaps it is a warning about something far older than even the dragons. From the buried heat of Unova, we turn now to a region where the cold was never the enemy, where a different kind of fire was used to end a war, and where the ultimate weapon left a scar that still bleeds into the present. The next chapter will take us to Kalos, where a king's grief reshaped the land, where a machine called the ultimate weapon erased thousands of lives in an instant, and where a single question remains unanswered. Was that atrocity an act of love or madness? From the shifting sands of Unova's Relic Castle, we now travel westward across the ocean, to a region whose history is written not in desert ruins, but in the very stone and light of its capital city, Kalos, a land of elegant boulevards, ancient forests, and a beauty that masks a wound 3,000 years old. If Unova's ancient war was a battle of ideals, Kalos' war was something far simpler and far more devastating, grief weaponized. The story begins with a king. His name was Az. He was a ruler of an ancient Kalos, a land that, like every region we have visited, once endured a conflict that threatened to erase everything. But this war was not a clash of dragons or a struggle between gods of land and sea. It was a human war, a war fought with Pokémon, yes, but driven by human ambition, human fear, and most of all, human loss. And it was a war that Az, more than anyone, had reason to end. Az had a Pokémon partner, a dear friend whose name has been lost to time. During the war, that partner died. We do not know the exact circumstances, whether in battle, in an accident, or as a result of the conflict's cruelty. What we know is that Az, a brilliant inventor and a ruler who commanded immense resources, could not accept that death. He was consumed by grief, and grief, when it cannot find solace, will seek power. So Az built a machine, the ultimate weapon. But its first purpose was not destruction, it was resurrection. Az designed the weapon to absorb the life energy of Pokémon, to concentrate that energy, and then to release it in a way that could restore life. He intended to bring back his beloved partner, and he succeeded. The machine worked. His Pokémon returned to life, a miracle born of science and desperation. But in doing so, Az used the life force of countless other Pokémon. That act, that exchange of countless souls for one, planted a seed of guilt that would grow into a forest of sorrow. The war, however, did not end. The same technology that could grant life could also take it. And Az, perhaps driven by rage, perhaps by the realization that his solution was incomplete, made a terrible decision. He did not just want to revive his friend. He wanted to end the war forever, to make sure no one else would ever suffer the loss he had endured. So he rebuilt the ultimate weapon. He transformed it from a life-giving machine into a nuke. This was the darkest chapter in Pokémon history, the genocide of the Kalos War. When the weapon was activated, it did not simply destroy armies. It unleashed a wave of energy that incinerated everything in its path. People, Pokémon, entire cities, all turned to ash in an instant. The war ended, yes, but at the cost of millions of lives. The land itself was scarred, and the memory of that day became a buried trauma, a secret that Kalos would try to forget for 3 millennia. But the weapon's energy did not disappear. It lingered. It seeped into the soil, into the water, into the bodies of the Pokémon and humans who survived. And there, it did something unexpected. It began to alter life at its most fundamental level, DNA. This was the birth of Mega Evolution. The radiation from the ultimate weapon did not just kill, it also mutated. Over generations, certain Pokémon in Kalos developed the latent ability to temporarily evolve into a more powerful, more radiant form when exposed to a special stone and a strong bond with their trainer. The very energy that had once annihilated an entire generation became the catalyst for a new kind of power. Now you might wonder, what happened to AZ? He lived. He lived for 3,000 years. The same weapon that had killed so many had also given him a form of immortality. He wandered the earth, a ghost in a world he had helped destroy, carrying the weight of his grief and his guilt. He became the world's oldest living being, a king without a kingdom, waiting for a moment of redemption. His Pokémon partner, the one he had resurrected, eventually left him, unable to bear the pain of what he had become. And so AZ walked alone, through centuries, through the rise and fall of empires until the modern era. That is the heart of Kalos' secret. A machine meant to save life became the instrument of its extinction. A king's love turned into a holocaust, and from the ashes, a new form of evolution was born, a permanent scar on the genetic memory of the Pokémon of this region. But even that is not the end of the story, for the ultimate weapon was not the only device AZ built. There was another creation, one tied to a tower that would later become the heart of Lumiose City, a structure designed not to kill, but to grant eternal life, and it still stands today, waiting to be understood. That is a tale for another night. For now, let the weight of Kalos' past settle, a king's grief, a weapon's transformation, the birth of mega evolution, and a flower that has been waiting for 3,000 years to bloom again. Inside the tallest tower in the world, the ultimate weapon did not only kill. In the aftermath of the Kalos War, after AZ pressed that terrible button and watched the light erase thousands of lives, he stood at the center of a silence that must have been deafening. He had ended the conflict. Yes, but the one person he had tried to save, the one Pokémon who had been his partner through every moment of grief, was still gone. The weapon had been built to restore her life, but its energy had been twisted into something destructive, and so in the shadow of his own atrocity, AZ turned back to the machine. He refused to accept that her death was the final chapter. This time, he built something different, not a weapon, but a vessel, a permanent, unbreakable container for a single spark of eternal life. He called it Ange. It was not a Pokémon, not a machine, but something between the two. A device designed to hold the soul of his fallen partner and grant her immortality. He embedded that device into the heart of a towering structure, a pillar of glass and metal that would catch the sun's light and transform it into pure energy. The structure was known later as Prism Tower, and it became the anchor for an entire city. But Lumiose City did not simply grow around the tower by accident. It was planned, designed, built as a monument to science and to the power of the sun. Every street, every boulevard, every rooftop garden was arranged in concentric circles radiating outward from the tower's base. The city itself was a living diagram of solar geometry, a testament to AZ's belief that energy could be harnessed not for destruction, but for preservation. The tower's crystalline surfaces refracted the sunlight into 100 colors, bathing the city in perpetual daylight. It was as if AZ wanted to freeze time itself, to hold his grief in a cage of light. And yet, even as he poured his genius into that structure, the natural world was responding in ways he could not control. The war had released an unimaginable surge of life and death energy across the whole of Kalos. Deep in the region's forests, an ancient being stirred. Xerneas, the embodiment of life, rose from its slumber in the form of a great tree, its antlers glowing with the essence of rebirth. It had been dormant for centuries, but the weapon's detonation had cracked the seal on its sleep. Xerneas began to spread life energy across the land, healing the scorched earth, causing flowers to bloom where ash had fallen. But where there is life, there must also be death. Yveltal, the counterpart, the creature of destruction, also awakened. Its presence was a shadow that fell over the recovering landscape. Where Xerneas gave, Yveltal took. The two beings entered a cycle of stasis and release, a biological rhythm that had been triggered by the war itself. Xerneas would bring life, and the region would flourish, but then Yveltal would draw that life back into the cycle, turning forests to dust and returning everything to a neutral state. It was not malice, it was balance. The war had broken that balance, and now the two legendary Pokémon were working to restore it. Whether the people of Kalos understood it or not, Azid, however, was not part of that natural cycle. He had rejected death entirely. His body had been altered by the weapon's radiation, and he had not aged in 3,000 years. He watched civilizations rise and fall, saw Lumio City expand from a tower into a metropolis, saw the Prism Tower become a landmark, a gym, a symbol of Kalosian pride. But he never told anyone what it really was. He never told them that the tower housed Ange, that the device was still there, dormant, waiting for the one it was meant to hold. And the people of Lumiose went about their lives, unaware that the very ground beneath their feet was built over a king's eternal grief. That city, with its spiraling streets and its solar-powered elegance, is a monument to one man's refusal to accept the end. It is a place where science tried to cheat the cycle, where the sun's energy was made to stand in for the life that had been lost. But the cycle always reclaims what is borrowed. Xerneas and Yveltal continue their eternal dance, and somewhere in the depths of the tower, Ange still waits. Whether it will ever be used for its original purpose, whether the partner will ever return, is a question that Kalos has never answered. But the story does not end with the tower. Beyond the region, beyond the world of Kalos, there are other gateways, other places where the boundaries between life and death, between worlds, grow thin. In a distant archipelago, the sky itself tears open to reveal a dimension beyond imagination, where beings of pure energy drift through an ocean of stars. That is the next thread to pull, the next secret hidden beneath the surface of the Pokémon world. The cosmic gateway of Alola awaits. From the ashes of Kalos, from the grief of a king, and the impossible machine that reshaped life and death, we now turn our gaze across the ocean to a place where the very fabric of reality is stretched thinner than anywhere else in the known world. Alola, a tropical paradise of volcanic islands, gentle seas and warm traditions. But beneath its sun-drenched surface lies a secret far older than any human civilization, a secret that ties this region directly to the edges of the multiverse itself. Alola is not just a chain of islands formed by volcanic activity, it is a cosmic gateway, a place where the boundaries between dimensions are not walls, but membranes, so thin that they ripple with the slightest cosmic pressure. To understand why, we must first understand the entity that made it so. The records speak of a being, or perhaps a force, that the ancient lawkeepers called the Cosmic Architect. This was no ordinary Pokémon, not in the sense we understand creatures of flesh and blood. The Cosmic Architect was a presence that existed before the stars themselves took their fixed positions in the sky. It was a weaver of space, a sculptor of the void, and its work left an indelible mark on the universe. The architect did not create the ultra wormholes directly. Instead, it caused areas of space to stretch, to become thin, like pulling taffy until the membrane between dimensions becomes translucent. And above all places, the region that would become Alola was where this stretching was most pronounced. Why here? Some theorists suggest it was because of the unique tectonic and magnetic properties of the islands. Others whisper that the architect chose this location deliberately, as if planting a seed for a future harvest of dimensional energy. What we know for certain is that the thinning of space created natural wormholes, weak points in reality that could be opened by sufficient energy or by the will of certain beings. And it was through one of these wormholes that something extraordinary happened. Energy from the stars themselves, raw cosmic radiation, and the primordial light of newborn suns began to leak into our world. But this was not a simple leak. It was a purposeful flow, as if the universe was trying to heal the tear by filling it with its own essence. That energy, falling through the wormhole, began to coalesce. It took on physical form. It became a Pokémon, not born from an egg, not hatched from the earth, but condensed directly from the fabric of the cosmos. That Pokémon is Cosmog. Cosmog is often called the Nebula Pokémon, but that name barely scratches the surface of its true nature. It is a being of pure potential, a spark of starlight given consciousness. In its earliest form, it is fragile, almost helpless, drifting like a cloud of gas. But it is not a creature of this world. It is a bridge, a living wormhole, and it carries within it the ability to evolve into one of two entities. Solgaleo, the beast that devours the sun, or Lunala, the beast that calls the moon. These are not mere Pokémon in the traditional sense. They are avatars of the very forces that govern the day and night cycles of our reality, and their power is directly linked to the thinness of Alola's cosmic membrane. The ancient people of Alola understood this on a level that modern science is only beginning to grasp. They did not have the vocabulary for quantum mechanics or dimensional topology, but they felt the truth in their bones. They built their culture around the idea that the sky is not a ceiling, but a door. Their legends speak of the Tapu, guardian deities who watch over the islands, but the Tapu are not the ultimate power. They are the gatekeepers. Their role is to maintain the balance between the worlds, to ensure that what lies beyond does not pour through unchecked, because as thin as the membrane is, it can be torn. And when it tears, the Ultra Beasts come, beings from dimensions where the laws of physics are different, where beauty is poison, where power is madness. But before we descend into that invasion, we must linger here at the moment of birth. Cosmog drifts through the nebula of its own making, and the cosmic architect watches from a place beyond time. Why did this entity choose to create such a delicate threshold? Was it an accident, a laboratory experiment, or was it a test? A way to see if a world like ours, with its complexity of life and emotion, could survive contact with the infinite. Perhaps the architect is still watching, waiting to see if we are worthy of the gate, or perhaps it has moved on, leaving Alola as a scar on the fabric of reality, a scar that pulses with the heartbeat of the stars. And so, as the sun sets over the Melemele Island and the first stars begin to pierce the twilight, remember that those points of light are not distant, they are close. They are pressing against the membrane, and somewhere in the deep space between thought and matter, the next tier is already forming. What comes through will not be a gentle breeze. It will be a storm of alien life, driven by hungers we cannot name. The previous chapter left us standing at the edge of the multiverse, where the fabric of reality had been stretched thin above the islands of Alola. The cosmic architect, that unknowable force, had torn openings between dimensions, allowing the light of other worlds to seep through. But where light enters, shadows follow, and in the spaces between worlds, something was waiting. Life from another dimension does not obey the rules we take for granted. The creatures that began to slip through the ultra wormholes were not Pokémon in any sense we could recognize. They did not reproduce through eggs, did not evolve through experience, did not respond to the energy of normal Pokeballs. They were alien in the most literal meaning of the word. Beings from a separate universe, one with its own physical laws, its own chemistry, its own terrifying logic. We call them Ultra Beasts, but that name is a human attempt to impose order on chaos. In truth, they are visitors from a place where our concepts of life and death, form and function, simply do not apply. Consider the first of these beings to make contact, Nihilego, the parasite queen. It drifted through the wormhole like a jellyfish made of crystal. But it was no animal. Its body was a transparent bell of neurotoxins, capable of latching onto a host and overriding their will. It did not feed in the way we understand. It consumed emotions, thoughts, the very sense of self. When it bonded with a human, it didn't just possess them, it remade them, twisting their deepest desires into monstrous new forms. Lusamine, the president of the Ether Foundation, fell victim to this. Her love for her missing husband became an obsession, and Nihilego amplified that obsession until she was no longer human, but a fusion of flesh and alien crystal. Her eyes hollow, a voice a distortion of maternal affection turned into a scream, and Nihilego was only the beginning. There was Buzzwole, a creature of impossible muscle, whose body seemed to be made of swollen veins and compressed energy. It drained the vitality of anything it touched, leaving its victims shriveled and pale. There was Pheromosa, a creature of speed and elegance that left a trail of decaying matter in its wake. As though its very presence accelerated entropy, there was Gurkatry, a mass of writhing electrical cables that thought in binary, its mind a logic entirely foreign to organic consciousness. Each Ultra Beast was a fragment of a world that operated on different axioms, and their arrival was not an invasion in the traditional sense. They were not an army with a plan. They were refugees, explorers, wanderers, blown through a crack in the cosmos. But to the fragile ecosystem of Alola, they were disasters waiting to happen. And then there was Necrozma. Of all the Ultra Beasts, Necrozma is the most tragic, the most misunderstood, and the most dangerous. Its name is ancient, older than Alolan human memory. In the language of the first settlers, Necrozma meant the one who devours light. But that was not always its nature. Long ago, before the wormholes, before the stretching of space, Necrozma was something else entirely. It was a being of pure radiance, a light bringer that travelled the dimensions as a source of warmth and life. In its home world, what we now call Ultra Megalopolis, Necrozma was the sun. The people of that city, the Ultra Recon Squad, once lived under its glow, their civilization thriving in the constant luminosity. But something happened. A catastrophe, perhaps, or an ancient betrayal. The details are lost, but the result is known. Necrozma lost its light. Its body became dark, its core empty, its mind consumed by an endless, insatiable hunger. It was no longer a bringer of light. It was a predator of light, a creature that had to steal illumination from other sources to survive. It began to drain the light from its own world, plunging Ultra Megalopolis into eternal twilight. The people there built mechanical towers to harvest what little light remained. But it was never enough. Necrozma grew desperate, its hunger driving it to seek out other dimensions, other suns, other sources of energy. When the Ultra Wormholes opened above Alola, Necrozma sensed the light. It could feel the sun of this world, the warm glow of the ocean, the bioluminescence of the coral reefs, the inner fire of every living Pokémon. It came through the wormhole not as a conqueror, but as a starving thing, its body a skeletal frame of black crystal, its head a prism that once blazed with colour, but now was dark and cracked. It absorbed the light of Alola's sun, and for a moment it seemed to glow again, but the hunger returned, deeper than before. It began to absorb the light of Pokémon, turning them into lifeless husks. It absorbed the light of humans, leaving them weak and dizzy, and then it turned its gaze to the sun itself. The people of Alola had always known that the stars watched them. The ancient myths spoke of a great light that had been stolen from the sky, a darkness that would one day return. The Tapu Guardians, the 4 guardian deities of the islands, remembered. They were not created by any human hand. They were born from the very essence of Alola, a spiritual reaction to the thinning of the veil between worlds. Tapu Koko, Tapu Lele, Tapu Bulu, and Pufini were the island's immune system, a defense mechanism designed to protect the region from intruders from ultraspace. They did not simply fight with brute force. They manipulated the terrain, the weather, the very fabric of reality around their islands. They created barriers of pure energy, invisible walls that could repel even the most determined Ultra Beast. But Necrozma was different. It was not just a traveller, it was a force of nature, a broken god. When Necrozma approached the altar of the sun, the ancient stone structure that aligned with rays of the sun, the Tapu Guardians gathered. Tapu Koko sparked with electric fury. Tapu Lele whispered healing illusions. Tapu Bulu rooted itself into the earth, and Tapu Fini shrouded the battlefield in mist. They tried to contain Necrozma, to drive it back through the wormhole, but Necrozma was beyond their power. It absorbed the light of their attacks, growing stronger, more desperate. It was not malevolent. It was simply starving, and its hunger had become a black hole that could not be filled. The battle reached its climax at the summit of Mount Lanakila. There a young trainer, guided by the legendary Pokémon Solgaleo, the beast that devours the sun, faced Necrozma. Solgaleo was itself a being of light, a Pokémon born from the same cosmic energy that had created the Ultra Wormholes. It could open portals to other dimensions, and it could harness the power of the sun. The trainer and Solgaleo fought Necrozma, not to destroy it, but to give it what it had lost. Light willingly given. With the help of the other legendary Pokémon, of Alola, Lunala, the beast that calls the moon, they performed an ancient ritual, channeling the light of Alola's sun into Necrozma's dark crystal body. For a moment, Necrozma transformed. Its black shell cracked, and pure, blinding light erupted from within. It became Ultra Necrozma, a being of incandescent glory, its body a fountain of radiant energy. It was beautiful, terrifying and whole. The hunger, for that instant, was silenced. It looked at the world it had tried to consume, and perhaps it remembered what it had once been, but the light was not permanent. The ritual could not heal the ancient wound. Necrozma's hunger would return, and it would need to feed again, somewhere else, in some other world. The Tapu Guardians watched as Necrozma retreated into the Ultra Wormhole, taking its Prism body back into the void. They knew that the threat was not gone forever. The thin place above Alola would remain, a permanent scar on reality, and so they continued their vigil, silent sentinels wrapped in mist and lightning and rain. Alola survived the Ultra Beast invasion, but the region was forever changed. The Ether Foundation, once devoted to protecting Pokémon, was rebuilt with a new mission: to understand Ultra Space, to study the Ultra Beasts, and to prepare for the next incursion. The people of Alola learned to look up at the night sky with different eyes, knowing that the stars were not just distant suns, they were windows. And elsewhere, in a distant region called Galar, another fall from the stars was about to unfold. A meteor, carrying something dark and ancient, was already on its way. The next chapter of this hidden history begins with that impact, with the Crimson Storm, and with a creature that would be called Eternatus. But that is a story for another night. For now, let the light of Alola's guardian deities warm you as you drift. The Ultra Beasts are gone, but their echo remains, a reminder that the universe is larger, stranger, and more fragile than we ever imagined. We ended last time in Alola, where the fabric of space stretched thin enough to let Ultra Beasts slip through from their own dimension. That region's entire existence is defined by a cosmic vulnerability, a place where the boundaries between worlds are almost transparent. But Alola is not the only region touched by something from beyond the sky. In fact, one of the most dramatic extraterrestrial events in Pokémon history happened thousands of years ago, in a land that would become Galar. Imagine a clear night over ancient Galar. No cities, no power spots, no Dynamax bands. Just rolling hills, dense forests, and a sky full of stars. Then, without warning, a streak of fire tears across the heavens. A meteor, but not just any meteor. This one carries something alive. Something that does not belong to this world. The impact is catastrophic. The ground shatters. Dust and debris blot out the sun. And buried deep in the crater, a dormant alien life form begins to leak its energy into the surrounding land. That life form is Eternatus. It arrived as a passenger inside the meteor, a creature of pure, concentrated energy from somewhere far beyond the reach of any known Pokémon. It was not a predator in the way we think of predators. It was a force, a living source of power so immense that its mere presence began to rewrite the physics of the entire region. The arrival of Eternatus changed Galar's physics at a fundamental level. You see, Eternatus is not just another legendary Pokémon. It is a being that naturally absorbs and radiates an energy that we now call Galar particles. These particles are the key to everything that makes Galar unique. When Eternatus crashed into the earth, it did not die. It went into a deep, near-death slumber, but its body continued to leak Galar particles into the surrounding rock and soil. Over centuries, those particles spread through the crust of the region, seeping into specific locations where the geology allowed them to accumulate. Those locations became power spots. Think of them as natural batteries, charged by the constant, slow release of energy from Eternatus's dormant form. The power spots are not random. They are the places where the Galar particles concentrated most densely, usually along fault lines or near ancient tectonic activity. And because the particles are a form of energy that can interact with Pokémon biology, any Pokémon that stands in a power spot becomes saturated with it. Under the right conditions, a red light, a surge of energy, that Pokémon can grow to enormous size, becoming what we now call Dynamax. But here is the haunting part. The Galar particles do not just make Pokémon bigger, they alter the very nature of the space around them. When a Pokémon Dynamaxes, it is not simply inflating like a balloon. The Galar particles warp reality, causing the Pokémon to exist in a state where its size and power are amplified many times over, but only within the boundaries of a power spot. That is why Dynamax battles are confined to stadiums built over those spots. The phenomenon is local, tied to the geography that Eternatus created when it fell. So for centuries, the people of Galar lived unaware of what lay beneath their feet. They built towns, raised families, and eventually discovered that certain locations made their Pokémon grow huge. They called it the Dynamax phenomenon and treated it as a natural wonder. But they did not know that the source of that wonder was a sleeping alien, buried deep underground, still leaking its energy into the world above. And they did not know that if Eternatus ever woke up, the Galar particles would stop being a gentle trickle and become a flood. That is exactly what happened during an event the ancient Galarians called the Darkest Day. A sudden red light filled the sky. Crimson storm clouds rolled in from nowhere. The power spots erupted with uncontrolled energy, and Pokémon all across the region began to Dynamax involuntarily, rampaging through towns and countryside. It was not a controlled battle phenomenon anymore. It was a catastrophe, and at the center of it all, Eternatus had stirred from its slumber, drawing all that energy back into itself, becoming a massive, terrifying dragon that threatened to consume the entire region. The Darkest Day ended only when two warrior brothers and their legendary Pokémon partners, Zacian and Zamazenta, faced Eternatus and drove it back into its dormant state. The power spots calmed. The giant Pokémon shrank back to normal, and the people of Galar once again forgot the truth of what had happened, turning the story into a myth about heroes and a great evil. But the science behind it never changed. Even today, every Dynamax battle you see in a Galar stadium is powered by the residual energy of an alien that crashed into the Earth thousands of years ago. The power spots still glow with Galar particles. Eternatus still sleeps somewhere beneath the ground, waiting, and that is where our next chapter begins. Because the Darkest Day was not the only time Eternatus tried to reshape Galar. It almost succeeded once, and in the modern era, something would finally wake it up for good. It fell silent for centuries. The meteor that had pierced Galar's sky, carrying the alien Eternatus, lay buried deep within the earth. Its Galar particles seeped into the land, saturating the soil and stone, waiting. But a dormant power is not a dead one, and when that power finally stirred, it did not announce itself with a whisper. It tore the clouds apart in a blaze of crimson. The day began like any other in the ancient history of Galar. Then the sky turned red, not the soft orange of a sunset or the pale pink of a dawn, but a deep, blood-soaked scarlet that stretched from horizon to horizon. Storms gathered in unnatural spirals, swirling with lightning that crackled in shades of violet and gold. And beneath that churning canopy, something terrifying began to happen. Pokémon, ordinary, familiar Pokémon, started to grow. Their bodies swelled, their eyes glowed with an ominous light, and they transformed into gigantic monsters, towering over towns and forests, their footsteps shaking the earth. The Crimson Storm was not a weather event. It was a signal, a release. The Darkest Day had begun. No one knew why. No one knew how to stop it. The giant Pokémon rampaged without reason, crushing villages, tearing through the landscape. The very energy that had made Galar's power spots so potent now turned against the region, channeling that alien force into every living creature. It was as if the land itself had become a weapon, and at the heart of that chaos, Eternatus finally awakened. The extraterrestrial entity, having fed on the Galar particles for centuries, now reached out with its own will, bending the storm to its purpose. It wanted to consume everything, every drop of energy, every life, every breath of the world it had fallen into. But the darkest day met its match in two unlikely saviors. Two warrior brothers, whose names have been all but lost to time, stood against the crimson tide. They did not wield weapons of steel or sorcery, they wielded loyalty. Their partners were two Pokémon, a wolf of iron and a wolf of shield, known today as Hoenn and Zamazenta. These were no ordinary Pokémon. They were beings of immense courage, forged in the very spirit of Galar. Together, the brothers and their wolves charged into the storm, seeking the source of the calamity. They found Eternatus at the epicenter, a writhing mass of tentacles and malevolent energy, and they fought. The battle raged for days, the sky burning red above them, the ground cracking beneath them. In the end, Zacian and Zamazenta, driven by the bond with their trainers, struck Eternatus down. They did not kill it. They sealed it away, deep beneath the earth, where it could not feed on the Galar particles. The crimson clouds parted. The giants shrank back to their normal forms. The darkest day was over, but the story of that salvation did not end there. In the aftermath, two heroes had saved the region. Yet if you look at Galar's modern history, you will find no statues of the brothers, no honoured graves, no festivals celebrating their names. Instead, the official narrative credits a single monarch, a king from a later dynasty, as the one who defeated the great evil. The two heroes were written out of the record, their deeds attributed to royalty, who had nothing to do with the battle. Why? Because the royal family of Galar, the lineage that would eventually lead to Chairman Rose and the modern league, wanted to consolidate power. A region saved by common warriors, by brothers with no royal blood, was a threat to their claim, so they rewrote history. They buried the truth. They erased the two heroes and placed a crown upon the head of a pretender. Zacian and Zamazenta, those two great wolves, became legends in the shadows. Their story survived only in whispers, in the rusted relics that would one day be rediscovered, in the names passed down by those who remembered. They became the forgotten kings, not kings who ruled, but kings who saved. And the Crimson Storm, the day the sky turned red and Pokémon became monsters, was reduced to a myth, a bedtime story for children who would never know that the ground beneath their feet still hummed with the energy of an alien sleeping in the dark. It is easy to forget when you walk through the pristine streets of Winden, or battle under the bright lights of a stadium, that Galar was nearly destroyed, that the Dynamax phenomenon that trainers now use for sport is a remnant of a catastrophe, that every time a Pokémon towers above the battlefield, it is borrowing power from a being that once tried to consume the world. The region built its identity on a lie, but the truth, as always, remains buried, waiting for someone to dig deep enough to find it. And if there is one place in the Pokémon world where the past refuses to stay buried, where layers of history are stacked like sediment, it is the Great Depression at the heart of Paldea, a crater so vast and so deep that the very laws of nature seem to warp within its walls. A place where ancient expeditions vanished, where strange crystals grow, and where the earth itself hums with an energy that no scientist has fully explained. That place, the great crater of Paldea, holds secrets that make even the darkest day seem like a prologue. The crimson storm that tore through Galar was a catastrophe born from the sky, from a meteor that carried an alien nightmare. But what if I told you that in another corner of the Pokémon world, an even greater mystery lies not in the heavens, but deep, deep beneath the earth, that a single wound in the land holds an entire lost world, a forgotten empire, and a prophecy so strange that the man who spoke it was mocked as a liar. This is the story of the great crater of Paldea. You see, long before the Paldea region became a land of sprawling deserts, snowy mountains, and vast seas, something terrible happened at its heart. The ground simply gave way. A colossal hole opened in the crust, plunging down for miles, until it reached a place that had not seen sunlight since before humans existed. Geologists call it a massive sinkhole, Explorers call it a miracle, but to the ancient people who first settled these lands, it was neither a disaster nor a wonder. It was a gift. That ancient civilization was the Paldean Empire, and while most of the Pokémon world remembers the empires of Johto or the dynasties of Kalos, the Paldean Empire has been all but erased from common history. They were a superpower in their own right, a kingdom that rose to prominence not through war or conquest, but because they alone possessed the key to the crater. They built their entire society around its edge, feeding their cities with strange energies that leaked from below, harnessing minerals and plants that grew nowhere else. The crater was their engine, their altar, their source of life. But the empire did not last. Why did they fall? The records are fragmented. What we do know is that the Emperor of Paldea eventually ordered the crater sealed. The entrance was barred, the passages collapsed, and the surrounding lands were abandoned. Some say the empire collapsed because of internal corruption. Others whisper that something emerged from the depths and frightened them so deeply that they chose to bury their own prosperity rather than face it again. Whatever the truth, the Paldean Empire faded into legend. The crater became a forbidden zone, a scar on the map that people whispered about but never visited. Centuries passed. The crater remained silent, covered by stone and soil, as if the earth had stitched itself shut. But not everyone forgot what lay beneath. And in a time not so long ago, a man named Heath looked at that sealed wound and decided he had to see what was inside. Heath was a scientist, an explorer, and perhaps a little bit of a dreamer. He had heard the old stories about the Empire and the strange ecosystem preserved at the bottom of the hull. He believed that if he could reach the bottom, he would find a prehistoric world, a pocket of time that had been cut off from the rest of the planet for eons. And so, with the backing of a powerful benefactor, Heath assembled an expedition and descended into the great crater of Paldea. The journey was brutal. The walls of the crater were steep, lined with crystalline formations that glowed with an inner light. The air grew thick, heavy with spores and the smell of wet stone. Strange calls echoed from below, sounds that belonged to no Pokémon anyone had ever catalogued. And then, finally, at the very bottom, Heath found what he had been looking for. An ecosystem that had evolved in isolation for millions of years. Plants that defied classification. Pokémon that seemed to have stepped out of a fossil bed. A primordial garden preserved under an eternal dome of stone. But Heath found something else. Something that would change his life forever. He found a set of crystals, unlike any ever seen, that seemed to hum with a strange frequency. When he touched them, he saw visions. Visions of the past, yes, but also visions of the future. He saw Pokémon that did not yet exist. Creatures that looked like ancient ancestors, but also like futuristic descendants. He saw a time when the crater would be opened again, when the old Empire's secrets would be laid bare, and when a new generation would stand at the edge of the abyss. Heath wrote down everything he saw. He published his findings in a journal that described the prehistoric ecosystem, the mysterious crystals, and most controversially, his visions of the future. He called those envisioned beings paradox Pokémon, and then the world called him a liar. The scientific community of his time could not reconcile his claims with the natural order, time travel, alternate timelines, Pokémon that were both ancient and futuristic. It sounded like fantasy. Heath's reputation crumbled. He was mocked, dismissed, and ultimately forgotten. He died, believing that no one would ever believe him. But Heath was not wrong. He saw the truth. The crater's ecosystem was indeed prehistoric, a snapshot of a world before humanity. They were not just geological curiosities. They were the source of the terrestrial phenomenon, the very energy that gives Paldean Pokémon their crystalline forms. More than that, they were somehow linked to time itself. The visions Heath experienced were glimpses of a reality where the boundaries between past and future had been blurred, where ancient and future coexisted in the same moment. Today, the great crater of Paldea is once again accessible. The seal that the Empire placed over it has been broken by modern technology, and explorers have descended into its depths. They have confirmed everything, Heath wrote. The prehistoric ecosystem is real. The Pokémon that live there are unlike any others on the planet, and the crystals. They still pulse with that strange energy, waiting for someone to unlock their final secret. So what is the true nature of the crater? Is it a natural formation? Or was it created by something beyond our understanding? The Paldean Empire knew more than they ever recorded. Heath saw the future and was silenced. And now, as we stand at the edge of that great hole, we have to ask ourselves, what else is buried down there? What other paradoxes are waiting to be discovered? Perhaps the answers lie not in the past, but in something much more unsettling. Something that blurs the line between what was, what is, and what will be. And that, my friends, is where the next chapter of this story begins. The mystery of the paradox phenomenon. I hope you're as amazed by this as I am. If you want to stay updated on more content like this, make sure to subscribe and join our community of curious minds. Trust me, what's coming next will challenge everything you thought you knew. The great crater of Paldea is more than a chasm in the earth. It is a wound in time. At its deepest point, where the Paldean Empire once drew power from the crystal veins that pulse beneath the surface, the very fabric of reality grows thin. The Herba Mystica that Heath's expedition discovered was only the beginning. What they found in the shadows of the crater's abyss would challenge everything we thought we knew about the history of Pokémon. Because here, in this sealed sanctuary, the past and the future have somehow learned to coexist. The Paradox Pokémon are not merely rare species that survived extinction. They are anomalies that should not exist in the same era. Imagine walking through a mist-filled cavern and encountering a creature that looks like a primitive ancestor of Donphan, its body armoured in ancient rock and tusks, shaped like prehistoric tools. Then, just a few steps away, a mechanical Donphan of impossible design glides silently on metallic treads, its eye glowing with the cold light of distant technology. Two beings from opposite ends of history, breathing the same air. How is this possible? The answer lies in the terrestrial energy. Those crystalline formations that cover the crater's walls and ceiling are not static crystals. They are data vessels, time capsules made of pure elemental light. When the Paldean Empire first harnessed this energy, they realized that the crystals could record and replay the essence of any Pokémon they touched. But the crystals do more than store information. They can retrieve it. The energy within the crater acts as a bridge, connecting the present moment to moments long past and moments yet to come. It is a conduit for temporal data, allowing beings from different timelines to materialize in the same physical space. Think of it as a library where every book is alive. The terrestrial crystals are the shelves, and the Paradox Pokémon are the stories that step off the pages. When a scientist in the Area Zero lab sends a signal into the crystal lattice, the energy resonates with the echoes of Pokémon that once lived and Pokémon that might one day exist. And they appear, not as holograms or illusions, but as flesh and blood creatures, confused and displaced, pulled through the rift of terrestrial resonance. But there is a deeper secret. At the very heart of this phenomenon lies a creature known as Terapagos. It is the hidden core of Paldea's elemental power, a being that predates the Empire, the crater, and perhaps even the continents themselves. Terapagos is the source code. The terrestrial energy that radiates from the crater is not a natural resource. It is the lifeblood of this ancient Pokémon. Every crystal in Paldea is a fragment of its shell, a shard of its consciousness scattered across the region. And in the deepest chamber of Area Zero, Terapagos slumbers, dreaming the timeline into existence. When Heath first saw the creature, he described it as a turtle of pure light, its shell shimmering with every colour of the spectrum. But what he didn't understand was that Terapagos is not just a Pokémon, it is a nexus, a point where all timelines converge. The Paradox Pokémon appear because Terapagos allows them to. It is the gatekeeper of temporal flow, and its power is what makes the crater a place where ancient and future can meet. The implications are staggering. If Terrapagos can connect different times, then the history of Paldea is not a straight line. It is a web. The Paldean Empire may have risen not despite the Paradox Pokémon, but because of them. They may have used Terrapagos to bring knowledge from the future, or perhaps they tried to control it and the crater collapsed in response. We don't know, but what we do know is that the terrestrial phenomenon is not a gimmick of the region's battle culture. It is a cry for help from a creature that holds the universe's clockwork together. And this is where our journey through the regions takes a turn, because if Area Zero is the heart of Paldea's mystery, then what lies beyond the crater is a story of exploration that stretches back to the Empire's founding. The same drive that pushed the Paldean Emperor to send expeditions into the abyss would eventually lead to the discovery of something even more profound. A truth that would rewrite the relationship between humans and Pokémon forever. It is a story of courage, of ambition, and of a forgotten era that we are only beginning to uncover. That story is called the Great Age of Exploration. The Paradox Crystals of Area Zero were not just a bridge between ancient and future. They were a signal that the world had been fractured for far longer than anyone realized. For countless millennia, the regions of the Pokémon world existed in isolation. The oceans were vast walls of darkness, the mountains impassable, and the creatures that roamed the wilds too terrifying to approach. This was the age of fear. Humans huddled in villages, living in constant dread of the Pokémon that could level a home with a single attack. There was no partnership, no trust, only survival. And then, 200 years ago, everything changed. The change began not with a war or a cataclysm, but with a small, clever device, the Pokeball. Before its modern form, there were only crude attempts to contain Pokémon, woven nets, stone cages, and the ancient apricorn spheres used by the people of Hisui. But those required immense skill and often failed. The breakthrough came when a brilliant mind, whose name has been lost to history, combined the apricorn's natural affinity for Pokémon energy with a simple mechanical latch. The first truly reliable capture device was born. With it, a trainer could safely subdue a Pokémon without harming it, and more importantly, could release it again. For the first time, humans could carry a partner in their pocket, a friend to defend them on long journeys. The impact was immediate. Within a single generation, the age of fear crumbled. People no longer saw Pokémon as mindless threats. They saw potential allies. The first explorers who dared to cross the seas took their captured companions with them. They sailed from the islands of Alola to the shores of Kanto, from the cliffs of Hoenn to the frozen north of Sinnoh, and when they arrived, they found other civilizations that had also learned to tame the wild. But these cultures were different. They had their own myths, their own legendary Pokémon, their own ways of training. The world suddenly realized it was not alone. This sudden interaction required structure. How could a trainer from Johto compete in a foreign land if the rules were different? How could a champion from Hoenn prove their strength in Galar? The answer was the synchronization of the gym circuits. Professors and league officials from every known region gathered in a secret summit, the location of which remains unknown. They agreed on a universal set of standards, 8 gym badges, a set of core rules, and a ranking system that recognized the Elite Four as the ultimate challenge. Over the next few decades, each region rebuilt its own local arenas to match the global model. The circuits were aligned like gears, and for the first time, a trainer could travel from Paldea to Unova and face the same structure of trials. The Great Age of Exploration was not just about discovery, it was about unity. But unity came at a cost. As the world connected, older knowledge began to fade. The ancient languages inscribed on the walls of the ruins of Alph were no longer taught. The forgotten wars of Kalos were buried beneath the neon glow of Lumiose City. The lost civilizations that had risen and fallen before the Pokeball was ever conceived were now treated as legend rather than history. And so, while the Great Age of Exploration opened doors across the continents, it also sealed the vault of the past. What truly happened in the world before 200 years ago? What secrets did the first humans leave behind when they feared the wild? That is a story that has yet to be uncovered. A story we will piece together in the lost civilizations as the great age of exploration unfolded. The regions of the Pokémon world began to reach toward one another for the first time in centuries. The development of the Pokeball was the key that unlocked this new era. It ended what we now call the Age of Fear, when humans could not safely approach wild Pokémon without the risk of injury or death. With that technology in hand, explorers, traders and scholars started to cross seas and mountains, carrying with them artifacts, stories and questions. And when they dug into the earth of distant lands, they discovered that the world had always been connected by deeper, older threads than anyone had imagined. Beneath the waves off the coast of Unova lies a submerged structure called the Abyssal Ruins. This is not a natural formation. It is a labyrinth of stone corridors and chambers, built with deliberate geometry, now encrusted with coral and patrolled by wild Pokémon. Divers have mapped sections of it over the years, but one thing has drawn particular attention: the inscriptions, carved into the walls, in an ancient script that predates any known Unovan language, are the words of a king who ruled a civilization that left no other trace. The messages are fragmentary, but they speak of power, of legacy, of a desire to be remembered, yet no one can fully translate them. Linguists have proposed partial readings, phrases about the throne of the sea, and a gift from the depths. But the true meaning remains locked away. The king's name is lost. His kingdom is lost. All that remains is his plea for remembrance, written in a language no living soul can read. And the question haunts us: what else did that civilization know? And why did it disappear so completely? If the Abyssal Ruins represent a single, isolated voice from the past, the Sinjor Ruins tell a different story, one of connection. These ruins sit in a remote corner of Johto, but their architecture and symbols are unmistakably tied to Sinnoh. Carved into the stone are images of Dialga, Palkia, and even Giratina, alongside motifs from the earliest Johto traditions. This is not a coincidence. Archaeologists have pieced together evidence of a cultural exchange between Johto and Sinnoh that took place long before the modern era, perhaps before either region had established the kingdoms we know today. The Sinjor Ruins seem to have been a meeting point, a neutral ground where knowledge was shared. Priests from Sinnoh brought their cosmology of time and space. Mystics from Johto brought their understanding of the legendary beasts and the burned tower. Together, they created a hybrid site of worship, a physical testament to the fact that even in the ancient world, ideas travelled. The ruins stand as proof that no region ever existed in complete isolation, that the web of connection today is only the surface of a much older network. But perhaps the most secretive civilization of all is the Draconid people. You may have heard their name whispered in Kalosian legends, but their story runs far deeper than most realize. The Draconids were a clan of warriors and mages who guarded the knowledge of mega evolution long before it became a global phenomenon. They lived in the mountains of Kalos, far from the courts and cities, and they kept their lore close. According to the fragments that survive, the Draconids were the first to understand the bond between human and Pokémon that could unlock a form beyond evolution, a transformation of pure energy and trust. They carved their teachings into stone tablets, passed them down through generations, and waited. They believed that only a chosen few should wield this power, lest it fall into the wrong hands. And for centuries, they succeeded. The Kalos War nearly destroyed them, but some survived, and their bloodline carried the secret forward until modern researchers finally began to piece together the truth. The Draconid people were not simply keepers of a battle technique. They were the guardians of a philosophy that the deepest power comes not from domination, but from unity. These lost civilizations, the voice beneath the sea, the meeting place of mythologies, the hidden clan of mega evolution, all point to something profound. The Pokémon world is not a fresh canvas. It is a palimpsest, overwritten again and again by time, war, and amnesia. Every ruin we find is a door to a forgotten chapter, and the next chapter may be the most mysterious of all. The myth of Human-Pokémon origins, a story that asks not what we built, but how we came to be together in the first place. The abyssal ruins stand as a monument to a king whose words echo through time, yet remain untranslated. The Sinnoh ruins, a meeting point between Johto and Sinnoh, whisper of cultural exchange between peoples who understood something we have long forgotten. These ruins are not merely stone and dust. They are pages torn from a book whose binding has rotted away, and if you linger long enough among their shadows, you begin to sense a truth so unsettling that most scholars dare not speak it aloud. The line between human and Pokémon may not be as clear as we pretend. There is a story told in the Sinnoh region, tucked away in the oldest text of the Canal of Library. It is known as the Sinnoh folk story, and it is one of the most controversial pieces of lore in the entire Pokémon world. The story speaks of a time before time, when humans and Pokémon were not separate species. They lived as one, shared the same flesh, the same breath, the same soul. They could communicate without words, understand each other without effort. The world was a single living tapestry, woven from the same thread. But then came the separation, and with it, the birth of individuality, of difference, of boundaries. The folk story is not taught in schools. It is not referenced in official league documents. It is treated as myth, as superstition, as the ramblings of primitive ancestors who could not explain the world around them. But the more you dig into the archaeological record of Sinnoh, the more you find echoes of this belief. The ancient murals in the Solacean ruins, the carvings on the walls of the Hall of Origin, the very structure of Mount Coronet itself, all seem to suggest that the people of Hisui viewed existence as a continuum, not a hierarchy. They did not see themselves as masters of Pokémon. They saw themselves as cousins, separated by time, by choice, by a cataclysm that rewrote the definition of life. What caused that separation? The story is silent. Perhaps it was the arrival of the legendary Pokémon, whose power carved the world into distinct realms. Perhaps it was the emergence of human consciousness itself, a kind of evolution that demanded a break from the old unity. Or perhaps it was something darker, a war, a betrayal, an act of pride that shattered the bond between species. Whatever it was, the result is the world we know today. A world where humans and Pokémon are two halves of a broken whole, forever trying to remember how to fit together. And yet, even in this fractured state, the bond between human and Pokémon did not disappear. It transformed, it adapted, and its evolution tells the story of civilization itself. In the earliest days, Pokémon were not partners. They were forces of nature, unpredictable and dangerous. Humans lived in fear, huddling in caves, lighting fires to keep the wild at bay. The first bond was not friendship, it was survival. A human might tame a Pokémon through force, through cunning, through the desperate need to eat or to flee. Pokémon were tools, weapons, shields. The ancient wars that scarred the regions, conflicts that built the towers of Johto, that darkened the skies of Kalos, that cracked the earth of Hoenn, were fought with Pokémon as soldiers, not as allies. They were instruments of destruction, their power harnessed by kings and warlords who cared nothing for the creatures they commanded. But something changed. Slowly, imperceptibly, the relationship began to shift. Maybe it started with a single trainer who treated their Pokémon with kindness instead of cruelty, who saw the light in their eyes and realized they were not beasts. Maybe it was the influence of legendary Pokémon themselves, who appeared to humans and demanded a different kind of partnership. Or maybe it was simply the natural consequence of living alongside another species for millennia. Eventually, you begin to understand each other. The turning point came with the development of the Pokeball. That small spherical device, born from ancient technology and modern science, did not just make capture easier, it changed the entire psychology of the bond. For the first time, Pokémon could be carried, transported, protected. They could be healed inside their balls, fed, rested. The ball became a symbol of trust, not imprisonment. A Pokémon that entered a ball willingly was making a choice to travel with a human, to fight alongside them, to share their journey, and that choice is the foundation of everything the Pokémon League stands for today. But here is the question that haunts every deep exploration of this history. Why do some Pokémon choose to stay in their balls? Why do they not simply flee the moment they are released? The answer is more complex than simple conditioning or Stockholm Syndrome. It goes to the heart of the Sinnoh folk story and the ancient bond that once united all life. Psychologically, a Pokémon that allows itself to be captured is entering into a reciprocal relationship. The ball becomes a den, a nest, a safe space. It is a portable territory that carries the scent of its trainer, the memory of victories, the comfort of routine. In the wild, a Pokémon must constantly be alert, searching for food, avoiding predators, defending its home. In a ball, that burden is lifted. The trainer provides food, protection, purpose. The Pokémon provides companionship, strength, loyalty. It is an exchange as old as the first pack bond between early humans and the wolves that became dogs. But there is something deeper. Many Pokémon, especially those caught in the wild, seem to understand that the capture is not an end, but a beginning. They sense that the trainer is offering them a chance to grow, to evolve, to see the world beyond their birthplace. In the ancient language of the folk story, this is not captivity, it is reunion. A Pokémon that chooses to stay in its ball is reconnecting with the species from which it was once separated. It is remembering, on a primal level, what it means to be part of a whole. The League system formalized this bond into a sporting culture. The wars faded, the gyms rose. Battles became contests of skill and trust, not death matches. The bond between human and Pokémon became the cornerstone of a global civilization. But the echoes of the past remain. Every time a trainer holds up a Pokéball and a burst of red light resolves into a living creature, they are reenacting a ritual that predates history. They are calling back to an age when the line between them did not exist. And yet, there are ruins that refuse to give up their secrets. There are stones carved with symbols that resemble both human and Pokémon anatomy. There are legends of individuals who could speak to Pokémon without words, who could feel their emotions as if they were their own. These are not fairy tales. They are fragments of a lost reality, buried beneath the layers of time and civilization. The Sinnoh folk story is not just a myth, it is a memory. As we prepare to move on to the next region, to the next layer of this hidden history, we must carry that memory with us, because the answers we seek are not always in the textbooks or the databases. Sometimes, they are whispered on the wind, carried across the sea, hidden in the spaces between one thought and the next. And the next chapter of this story will take us to a place where the winds themselves hold secrets, where waves crash against shores that have never been mapped, and where a new mystery is about to break the surface of everything we thought we knew. The Sinnoh folk story left us with a question that lingers like mist over a quiet lake. If humans and Pokémon once shared a common ancestor, what happened to that bond when the world grew wide and the oceans deep? The answer may not lie in the bones of ancient creatures or the etchings on a forgotten stone. It may be carried on the wind, whispered across waves that have never known a shore, because the next great discovery in the Pokémon world is not hidden under a mountain or inside a crater. It is out there, on the unnamed frontier, a vast, uncharted stretch of sea that connects everything we thought we knew. Consider the currents. They move like invisible rivers, pulling warm water from the tropics toward the poles and dragging cold water back to the equator. In our own world, sailors once mapped these streams by the drift of wreckage and the color of the plankton. In the Pokémon world, the currents do more than shape climate. They shape the migration of entire species. The oceanic currents are the circulatory system of the planet, and the Pokémon that ride them are the blood cells, carrying life and mystery from one island to the next. The winds and waves are not random. They are a pattern, a language spoken by the sea itself. And if you follow that language long enough, you start to see the clues. A cluster of islands that appears on no modern map. A persistent weather phenomenon that satellites cannot explain. Whispers from sailors who claim to have seen a landmass shrouded in perpetual storm, where the sky glows with an energy that is not lightning. These are not tall tales. They are breadcrumbs leading toward the next great geographical discovery. The unnamed frontier is real. It is waiting just beyond the last known coordinate, where the currents converge and the legendary birds hold their silent court. The legendary birds, Articuno, Zapdos and Moltres, are not simply guardians of ice, lightning and fire. They are markers of a global pattern. Their migration routes trace the lines of the world's most powerful wind currents. From the seafoam islands of Kanto to the crown tundra of Galar, the path of these birds forms a loop that arcs over the entire northern hemisphere. They are not wandering aimlessly. They are following something. A magnetic pull, perhaps, or a memory of a time when the continents were one. When the legendary birds fly, they reveal the hidden geometry of the planet. Their wings beat against the same winds that carry drifters and discoveries alike. And what of the other legendary trios? The beasts of Johto, the golems of Hoenn, the lake guardians of Sinnoh. Each group is tied to a specific region, but only the birds seem to span the globe. That is no accident. The birds are the oldest of the regional trios, the ones that predate the split of the land masses. Their migration is a living fossil, a reminder that the world was once smaller, that the islands were connected by a single sky and a single sea. To understand the currents is to understand the original shape of the Pokémon world. Now look at the clues left behind by the last few generations. The Galar region, with its power spots and the darkest day, sits on a ley line that runs straight through the heart of the ocean. The Paldea region, with its great crater and its terrestrial energy, is surrounded by currents that carry unusual life forms. And in the most recent whispers from the franchise, there are references to a new region, one that has no official name yet. Only a set of coordinates and a description of winds that never change direction. This is the unnamed frontier. The game developers have been seeding hints for years. A character in one game mentions a distant land beyond the Eastern Sea. A book in a library describes a civilization that built its temples on a chain of volcanic islands. A fisherman in a coastal town says he once caught a Pokémon that had never been seen before, with scales that shimmered like the aurora. The oceanic currents connect all of these dots. They are the thread that ties the islands of the world into a single narrative. And if you follow that thread to its end, you will find the next frontier. A place where the winds and waves hold secrets that no modern technology has yet decoded. But this mystery is not just about geography. It is about the nature of reality itself. Because as we look beyond the horizon, we begin to realize that the world we know might be only one of many. The currents that connect the islands also connect the dimensions. The same winds that carry the legendary birds across the globe might also carry whispers from other universes. And that is where the next chapter begins, where the winds and waves give way to something far stranger. A theory that redefines everything we thought we knew about the boundaries of existence. The multiverse is not a speculation. It is the only explanation left standing. The currents of the world carry more than just ships and Pokémon. They carry stories, and sometimes they carry entire realities. As we trace the paths of the winds and waves, we saw how the ocean itself whispers of lands yet to be discovered. But what if those whispers aren't just about new shores? What if they are echoes of other worlds entirely, pressing against the fabric of our own? This is where the Pokémon multiverse reveals itself, not as a theory, but as a cornerstone of everything we have ever experienced. And it all begins with a single revelation from the Hoenn region, one that shattered the illusion of a single timeline. In the Delta episode of Pokémon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, we were introduced to a truth that had been hidden in plain sight. Zinnia, the enigmatic lawkeeper of the Draconid people, spoke of a catastrophe that was destined to befall Hoenn. A meteor, the same one that Rayquaza had faced long ago, was fated to strike. But here was the twist. In the world of the original Ruby and Sapphire, that meteor had been stopped by a trainer wielding immense power. In the world of Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, a world where Mega Evolution exists, the meteor was a different threat. Zinnia explained that these two timelines were parallel, running alongside each other like rivers that never meet. One timeline is the non-Mega world, the world of our childhood adventures. The other is the Mega timeline, where the very essence of evolution can be amplified beyond natural limits. And the Delta episode made it clear that both are equally real. But how can these worlds interact? How can we, as players, trade a Pokemon from a Mega timeline to a non-Mega timeline with the simple glow of a link cable? The answer lies in the very technology we have taken for granted for decades. The link cable, that humble accessory that connected two Game Boy systems, is not just a wire. In the lore of the Pokemon universe, it is a conduit between parallel realities. It synchronizes the data streams of two distinct branches of the multiverse, allowing creatures from one timeline to cross into another. This is not a gameplay abstraction. It is a canonical mechanism, and it is reinforced by the rings of Hooper, the mischievous mythical Pokemon. Hooper's ability to create portals through space and time is not random. Its rings are gateways that reach across dimensions, pulling legendary Pokemon from other worlds into ours. The very act of trading, of battling a friend, of encountering a mythical event Pokemon, is a confirmation that every save file, every cartridge, every journey is a single thread in an infinite tapestry. Consider this: every time you started a new game, you were not simply replaying the same story. You were entering a new branch of the multiverse, a unique timeline, where you, as the protagonist, become the hero. Every trainer you meet in your journey is also a protagonist in their own universe. The Pokemon League is not a single event. It is an institution that exists across countless realities. The professor who gives you your first Pokemon is the same professor, but in your world, he gives you a Charmander. In another, he gives you a Bulbasaur. Each choice, each encounter, each captured Pokemon creates a divergence. The multiverse theory in Pokemon is not a footnote. It is the very structure that allows the franchise to exist. It explains why you can have a game where Mega Evolution is a mystery and another where it is commonplace. It explains why the ultra wormholes of Alola can open into worlds where the laws of physics are different. And it explains why, in the depths of the Hoenn region's lore, the Delta episode dared to break the fourth wall and tell us directly: world. Every world is part of a grand interconnected multiverse. The Draconid people, the keepers of this knowledge, understood that the bond between humans and Pokemon is not confined to one reality. Zinnia's own story is a testament to this. She sought to summon a trainer from another timeline to save her world, because she knew that the heroes of one timeline could cross over to help another. That is the power of the multiverse. It is not a cold, distant concept. It is a living, breathing network where every journey matters. The link cable is just a tool, but the bond it facilitates is a bridge between universes. Hooper's rings are not just portals. They are proof that the fabric of reality is porous. And so, as we stand at the edge of this revelation, we must ask, what is it that powers these connections? What force allows legendary Pokemon like Rayquaza, Dialga, or Necrozma to exist across multiple timelines without losing their identity? The answer lies in the energy that shapes the very legends we revere. It is a force that is not confined by the boundaries of a single universe. It is something deeper, something that pulses at the core of every myth we have uncovered. What is that energy? How does it sustain the multiverse? And what happens when we begin to understand its true nature? Those questions lead us to a frontier even more mysterious than the winds and waves. A frontier where science and mythology converge, and where the answers might reshape everything we thought we knew about legendary power. We close the last chapter, standing at the edge of possibility, staring into the mirror of the multiverse. We saw that timelines branch, that every path is real, that a mega world and a non-mega world can both exist, separated only by the choice of a hero or the whim of a legendary. But if the universe can fracture, what force holds it together? What energy runs through all these worlds, from the deepest crater to the highest tower, from the birth of Arceus to the last battle in a gym? The answer is not one, but three, and each one is a revelation. Infinity energy. The phrase sounds like something from a forgotten text, but it is the most fundamental currencies of the Pokémon world. It's the life force that powers Mega Evolution, that allowed AZ's ultimate weapon to function, that flows through every Pokéball, every evolution stone, every move. Think of it as the raw essence of life itself, a boundless well that every Pokémon and every human, in a smaller way, taps into. It is the reason a Pikachu can generate lightning, why a Gardevoir can bend space, and it is the reason a 10-year-old can command a god. But infinity energy is not the only power source beneath the surface of these regions. In Galar, something else fell from this, a meteor carrying an ancient parasitic entity, Eternatus. When it crashed, it began to leak a strange crimson-tinted energy into the land, Galar particles. These particles settled into specific points across the region, creating what we now call power spots, and they gave rise to Dynamax, the ability for Pokémon to grow to colossal size, their bodies bathed in red energy, their moves devastating entire stadiums. The particles don't just empower, they warp, they tap into a different dimension, a space where size and power are amplified beyond natural limits. The darkest day was not a myth. It was a particle storm that transformed ordinary creatures into monsters, and only the intervention of Zacian and Zamazenta, and their own connection to that same energy, brought the world back from the edge. Then there is Paldea, a region built over a massive crater, a hole in the earth that leads to a place called Area Zero. Down there, scientists discovered something else entirely, the terrestrial phenomenon. It is not a particle shed from a meteor, nor is it a pure life essence. It is a crystallization of energy, a state where a Pokémon's power becomes visibly locked into a gem-like shell, shifting its type, amplifying its attack, and leaving a shimmering, almost frozen aura. Where does it come from? The depths of Area Zero hold crystals that pulse with a frequency unlike anything else on the continent. Some believe it is the residue of an ancient cosmic event, a reflection of the universe's own geometry. Others think it is the planet's own defensive response to the presence of so many legendary energies concentrated in one place. All three have one thing in common. They are dangerous, they are ancient, and they are being studied, weaponized, and, by some, worshipped. Which brings us to the most volatile pursuit of all, primal reversion. This is not the same as Mega Evolution, which requires a bond and a stone. Primal reversion is a forced regression, a reversal to a state that existed before the world was stable. Think of Gruden and Kyogre. When they were awoken from their long slumber in Hoenn, they did not simply mega evolve. They returned to their primal forms, raw embodiments of land and sea, their energy so potent that they began to reshape the planet. The land expanded, the oceans surged, the atmosphere burned, and only the intervention of Rayquaza, who is itself a force of balance, could calm them. But the threat did not end there, because primal reversion can be simulated. Scientists, criminals, and cultists have tried to replicate that state, to force a Pokémon back into a form that predates the modern ecological contract. The results are catastrophic. A Pokémon in a forced primal state loses its connection to the trainer. It becomes a vessel of pure elemental rage. It doesn't just battle, it terraforms. Entire ecosystems are destroyed in seconds, and the energy released is so unstable that it can tear holes in the fabric of reality. If the multiverse is a tree, primal reversion is a disease trying to force the tree back into being a seed. It is the opposite of evolution. It is the world unmaking itself. Now think about this. These are not just scientific curiosities. Every region has its own variation of this power. Kanto's Mewtwo, Johto's legendary beasts, Unova's Tau Trio. The world is saturated with ancient, untamed energy. And yet, The governments of the Pokémon world allowed children, some as young as 10 or 11, to carry Pokémon that can command these forces. Why? Why hand a god to a child? The answer is not negligence. It is a calculated risk, born from a hard-won understanding of the bond. The same infinity energy that powers primal reversion also powers the Pokéball, the League system, the entire framework of modern civilization. It was discovered long ago that a willing, trusted partnership, a bond of respect and care, acts as a stabilizer. A Pokémon connected to a good trainer is less likely to lose control, less likely to succumb to the whispers of ancient energies. The League is not just a sport, it is a containment system. By distributing these mythical creatures across the population, by teaching young trainers how to form bonds, by making them responsible for a living creature, the governments ensure that the energy is spread thin, that no single individual holds too much power, and that any outbreak can be contained quickly. A 10-year-old with a Charizard is safer than a warlord with a Groudon, and the world learned that lesson the hard way, through wars, through the darkest day, through the rise of Team Rocket and Team Galactic and Team Flare. So the children are not just allowed, they are essential. And yet, even with all these safeguards, the pursuit of primal power continues. There are labs in secret places, archives in the depths of libraries, fragments of ancient texts that describe a time before the bond, when the energies were wild and the earth bent to the will of a few. Those who seek primal reversion are not just alchemists, they are fundamentalists. People who believe the world lost something when it became stable. They want to bring back the raw chaos, and they are willing to burn an ecosystem to do it. We stand now at the edge of another revelation, one that stretches far beyond energy and particles. We have seen how civilizations forgot their past, our wars scarred the land, our legendary beings shaped continents. But there is a record of those wars, a hidden chronicle that the League does not want you to read. The battles that never made it into the history books. The ones that involved not just two sides, but entire regions, entire species, entire dimensions. That story is waiting in Chapter 27, The Forgotten Wars. For now, let the energy settle. Rest your mind. Tomorrow, we walk into the ruins of the past. We ended the last chapter standing at the edge of a dangerous boundary. The point where primal reversion threatens to undo the careful balance of life itself. That pursuit of raw, unrefined energy is not a modern invention. It is the same hunger that has driven civilizations to war for thousands of years, and the scars of those wars are still buried beneath the soil of every region you have ever explored. The forgotten wars of the Pokémon world are not myths. They are events that shape the very geography of power we take for granted today. And the deepest, most haunting of these conflicts may be one that crosses an entire ocean. Let us begin with a connection that the games never explicitly name, but the clues are undeniable. The regions of Unova and Kalos are separated by thousands of miles of open sea. One is inspired by New York, the other by France. But beneath the surface of their modern identities lies the shadow of an ancient transatlantic war. The evidence is scattered like fragments of a shattered tablet. In Kalos, you have the ultimate weapon, a machine designed by AZ to end a war by unleashing devastating energy. That weapon left a crater so immense that it reshaped the landscape, and the legends say it drew upon the life force of countless Pokémon. In Unova, you have the Relic Castle, buried beneath the desert, and the ruins of a kingdom that vanished without explanation. And you have the Abyssal Ruins, where a king's message remains locked, in a language no one can fully decode. That king, according to the fragments, sought to end a conflict that threatened not just his own land, but something far larger. When you trace the roots of ancient migration and the distribution of certain fossil Pokémon, a pattern emerges. The war that AZ fought was not confined to Kalos. It spilled across the ocean. The victims of the ultimate weapon were not just Pokémon of Europe. They were Pokémon from a distant continent, Unova. The fossil records in the desert resort and the ancient tombs of the Relic Castle show a sudden, catastrophic extinction event that aligns with the activation of the ultimate weapon. The same timeline, the same kind of energy burns in the stones of both regions. And the name of that war, the legends of Kalos call it the War of 3,000 years ago. But in Unova, it has no name. It was simply erased from memory. Only the ruins remain, whispering of a conflict that united two continents in fire and loss. This is the first forgotten war, the one that rewrote the world's map in sorrow. But there is a second war, much closer to our own time, and it is one that shaped the region we all know as the starting point of the entire Pokémon journey, Kanto. This is the war that Lieutenant Surge fought in. Lieutenant Surge is a gym leader in Vermilion City. He calls himself the Lightning American. He is loud, brash, and his Pokémon are trained with a military precision that suggests he did not learn his skills in a peaceful gym challenge. In the original games, his dialogue contains a single chilling line. He says, and I quote, "I tell you kid, Pokémon changes a person's life. I learned that when I fought in the war, that is all we get." No explanation of which war, no date, no enemy, but the implications are enormous. The war Lieutenant Surge fought in was not an ancient conflict. It was modern. It involved humans using Pokémon as weapons of war in a way that echoes the darkest chapters of our own history, and the scars it left are still visible in Kanto's culture. Consider the technology of the region, the Pokémon Center, that iconic building where injured Pokémon are restored to full health in seconds. It is a marvel of modern medicine. But why does such a comprehensive network of medical bays exist in Kanto? And why are they free for any trainer? The answer lies in the war. The Pokémon Center system was not designed for peace. It was designed for battlefields. The rapid healing technology, the specialized nursing staff, the centralized database of injury patterns. All of that was born from the need to treat war-wounded Pokémon on a massive scale. After the war ended, the system was repurposed for civilian trainers, but the architecture of it, the efficiency, the sheer capacity to heal hundreds of Pokémon simultaneously, that is the infrastructure of a military medical corps. The war that Surge fought in drove the development of that technology. It also drove the development of the Pokeball itself. The modern capture system was refined for rapid deployment and retrieval in combat. The very act of catching a Pokémon, as we know it today, was standardized during that wartime period. The league system, the gym challenge, all of it arose in the aftermath as a way to channel the trainer instinct into peaceful competition. But who was the enemy? We have clues. Surge is an American. Kanto is based on Japan. The war he fought in may have been a conflict between nations, perhaps between Kanto and another region, or between a coalition of regions. Some believe it was a war against a force that threatened the entire Pokémon world. Others believe it was a civil war within Kanto itself. The truth is buried in the redacted records, the Pokémon League's archives. But one thing is certain, the generation that fought that war is still alive. Surge is not a relic. He is a veteran who brought the trauma of battle into the gym. And every time you step into a Pokémon Center, you are walking through a door that was first opened by the desperate need to save lives on a battlefield. These forgotten wars, the ancient transatlantic war between Unova and Kalos, and the modern war that shaped Kanto, are not just footnotes. They are the hidden pillars upon which the modern Pokémon world was built. The ultimate weapon, the healing machines, the gym badges, even the way we think about Pokémon as partners rather than soldiers. All of it is a reaction to the violence that came before. The world you explore in the games is a world that chose not to remember its own brutality, but the ruins remember, the veterans remember, and the technology remembers. The question is, what happens when the next war comes? We have seen glimpses of the future in the newer regions. The industrial militarization of Galar's gym challenge, the corporate control of energy in Paldea, the interdimensional threats of Alola. Each new generation of trainers inherits a world shaped by old wars, and each generation may be closer to a new one. The lore is not static. It is building towards something, and that brings us to the next chapter. Because if the past is full of forgotten wars, the future holds conflicts we have not yet imagined. We will explore what lies ahead for the regions, the legendaries, and the balance that keeps the world from tearing itself apart. That story is called The Future of the Law, and it will show you how the threads we have been following are weaving together into a tapestry that is still unfinished. You will want to see where it leads. We have traced the scars of forgotten wars, from the Unova Kalos connection to the battlefield that shaped Lieutenant Surge's soul. We have seen how ancient conflicts ripple through time, leaving behind ruins, legends, and the quiet trauma of a generation that never speaks of what it saw. But the most haunting secret of the Pokémon world is not the war itself. It is what happens after the war ends. It is what happens when the dust settles, when the heroes die, when the stories become bedtime tales, and then eventually become fairy tales. And then one day, they return. This is the cycle of forgetting. Every generation born into this world inherits a past they cannot fully believe. The children of Sinnoh hear of a creator who shaped space and time, but they grow up to become professors and gym leaders, dismissing the stories as primitive myth. The people of Hoenn know that the land itself was born from a titanic struggle between Groudon and Kyogre, yet they build their cities on that same land without a second thought. In Galar, the darkest day is a legend told to school children, a cautionary tale about a red storm and giant Pokémon, until a meteorite falls from the sky and Eternatus awakens once more. The cycle is relentless. Each new era treats the myths as fairy tales, as allegories, as the naive explanations of a pre-scientific age. And then the myths prove themselves real. A legendary Pokémon stirs in a cave, an ancient weapon activates, a wormhole tears open above Alola, and the world scrambles to remember what it had so conveniently forgotten. Why does this happen? Why does knowledge decay so predictably? Perhaps because the truth is too heavy to carry across centuries. Perhaps because each generation must discover the mystery for itself, must feel the terror and wonder of encountering the divine firsthand. Or perhaps there is something deeper at work, something that operates on a scale far beyond human memory. Consider the pattern. The regions are not isolated. Their mythologies share a common thread: creation, conflict, catastrophic event, then a long period of dormancy. Arceus creates the universe, then falls asleep. Groudon and Kyogre clash, then retreat. Eternatus falls from the sky, is defeated, and sealed away. The ultimate weapon fires, and then its creator vanishes. Each time the world heals. Each time the system rights itself. Each time the crisis is contained and the cycle resets. But who or what is doing the resetting? Is it the legendary Pokémon themselves, acting as guardians of balance? Or is the entire Pokémon world something more than a planet? What if it is a self-correcting organism? Think about the evidence. The regions are connected by currents, by energy fields, by invisible threads of infinity energy. The same force that powers a Pikachu's Thunderbolt also fuels the Dynamax phenomenon, the Terrestrial phenomenon, the very existence of Ultra Beasts. This energy is not random. It flows, it concentrates, it responds to stress. When a region tips too far toward chaos, the energy manifests a solution. A Rayquaza appears to calm the primordial clash. A Dialga rewinds the damage. A Celebi heals the land. The world does not collapse, it corrects. And humans, for all their ambition, are part of that correction. The Pokémon League, the Professor System, the very act of training, these are not merely cultural traditions. They are mechanisms for understanding and channeling the world's energy. Every badge earned, every battle won, every Pokéball thrown is a small act of alignment. The world is teaching its inhabitants how to keep it stable. But what happens when the correction fails? What happens when a war is not contained? When a weapon fires without restraint? When a meteorite brings something that cannot be sealed? The regions carry the scars of those near failures. Kalos still remembers the ultimate weapon, not as a legend, but as a wound. The soil there is rich with the remnants of life and death, and Galar's power spots still pulse with the memory of Eternatus, a buried heartbeat that could rise again. Perhaps the greatest hidden secret is that the Pokémon world is not a collection of separate lands with separate stories. It is a single living system, a vast organism that breathes through its mountains, its oceans, its tunnels, and its skies. The 10 regions are not chapters in a book. They are organs in a body. Kanto is the foundation, the birthplace of the modern trainer, the original beating heart. Johto is the memory, the keeper of traditions and towers. Hoenn is the lungs, cycling the elemental forces of sea and land. Sinnoh is the spine, the axis around which creation itself was formed. Unova is the mind, the region where truth and idealism wrestle for dominance. Kalos is the limb that was broken and healed, still scarred but functional. Alola is the skin, the boundary between the known world and the dimensions beyond. Galar is the gut, the place where raw energy is processed and transformed. Paldea is the marrow, deep within the crater, where the oldest secrets still pulse. And there is one more region, not yet named, a whisper on the winds and waves, a frontier where the currents of the world converge. It will be the next organ, the next layer, the next correction. So what does the future hold for the lore? It will repeat. The cycle will continue. A new generation will be born into a world of peace and convenience. They will laugh at the old stories, call them fairy tales, treat the legendaries as little more than rare creatures to be collected. And then something will happen. A crack will appear. A forgotten power will stir, and the world will remember. At this time, we will have watched it all. We will have traced the threads from Kanto to Paldea, from the first Pokeball to the mysteries of Area Zero. We will know the hidden secrets that bind every region together, that the past is never truly dead, that the legends are not metaphors, and that this world, however vast and fragmented it seems, is one living, breathing, self-correcting organism. The question is not whether the cycle will turn again. It will. The question is whether we will be ready to listen when the fairy tales begin to speak the truth. What did you think of this journey? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this changed your perspective or taught you something new, consider subscribing for more mind-expanding content. And if you know someone who would find this as fascinating as you did, share it with them. These are the kind of conversations that matter.